Hello, everybody, and I hope you guys are all having a good Friday. Um, I am now live here on Analyzing Finance with Nick to celebrate a million views. And I said let's do it a little earlier in the day so some of my people who are not on the West Coast can watch, or even some of the people in Europe before their bedtimes. And without further ado, we are going to get started. We're going to first start with some carryover questions that from last one, because I promised in the last stream that I would answer all the questions from that one. However, given I'm getting so many questions in the chat now, like it's not going to be viable for me to do that anymore. So I will answer as many questions as I can that pop up in the chat, in addition to the pre-written ones. But if you want to guarantee that your question is going to be answered, please do it through a super chat so you will move up your spot in line, because we were flooded last time. It's great. I love the conversations. These are really fun. And since I am starting this early in the day, hopefully we can have a much longer stream before I get tired. But the first question is from Lenny. And Lenny is like, hey, Nick, could you explain supply side economics? And what do you think of its effectiveness specifically for the average worker? Well, supply side economics is really became famous in the 80s and the Reagan Revolution. And it's the idea that you can stimulate economic growth by encouraging the creation of more supply. And I think it's Say's law that I might be wrong on this, but it's that supply creates its own demand. And so if you create enough supply, you'll drive down the prices for things. And so as a result, the consumer on the same wage will be able to afford to buy more stuff. And therefore, you'll have more purchases and more goods and services, and that trickles its way down throughout the economy. And the thing that the government has the most control in terms of the price of is the price of taxation. And so that's why lowering taxes is the solution, apparently, to drive supply side economics. The flaw with supply side economics, and as somebody who has a sympathies towards it, is that the mechanism is of lowering tax rates may not be really enough to create the supply increases that you need. And say if you give more tax breaks to a company, they may not reinvest that extra gains into producing more supply. They may just take the profits and pay their management, pay higher dividends, or just buy back shares and or do M&A deals. And so as a result, the transmission mechanism is broken. I think supply side economics works if it's done correctly. The problem is that the businesses who were supposed to be creating all this new supply ultimately failed to do so. So that was kind of the issue with supply side economics. And so hopefully that answers the question. Well, in terms of the specific worker, if it's done correctly, it's great for the average worker. And the place that needs the most supply side economics is housing. Um, Housing is just simply too expensive, mainly, and a lot of that is simply just because of a lack of supply due to regulations on the state and local level in the U.S. and some countries on the national level. Um, you have Canada, for example, whose whole economic policy is to keep housing as high as possible so people can build their retirement on real estate speculation versus producing anything. But that's that's a tangent. But the point really is that you've got if you had some real supply side economics and reforming, cutting regulations and cutting the taxes or permitting fees, which are effectively taxes on the local level on housing construction, then you would get more supply and more affordable housing. So yeah, I think there's a place for how the supply side economics just needs to be done correctly. Fiesta Van asks, recently you said that housing is acting as the distortionary asset inflating the broader market like oil in the 1970s. How can we reduce the cost of housing? Mass deportations, making inner cities safer? Well, this kind of actually changes it to the question that I was asking about supply side economics. Um, Housing is the asset that's driving inflation, and if you want to get down, you need to increase the supply and or reduce the demand. Deportations would do that. Um, there was like a CEO of a major home builder. He didn't directly say it, but it was kind of implied that like deportations would increase housing supply and lower costs. So the people even up in the industry kind of know that could to be an answer. But beyond that, yeah, making inner cities safer. Yeah, a lot of the problem with housing, especially like in major urban areas, is that large portions of these neighborhoods are not safe. And due to people not wanting to live near high crime, the demand for the perceived safe neighborhoods. I talked about this in the geography of wealth video, both parts one and part two. People will just crowd into the quote unquote safe neighborhoods and bid up the prices on these neighborhoods to the point that they're unaffordable because the rest of the city is just too dangerous to live in due to high crime. It's also a product of the public education system. A lot of parents will need to live in a place that has high quality public schools, and that's a limited amount of neighborhoods. And so you get crowding, and people all want to live in the same neighborhoods to go to the same public schools because the public system in the general is just so bad. And if you reformed education to make it, I don't know, like a voucher system so that schools had to compete and people chose to go what school, you're not just picked a default one based on what neighborhood you live in, then you could have people live in other neighborhoods. They don't all have to live in the same neighborhoods with the good public schools, or you normalize homeschooling or make have other policies make private school more affordable. So that's a way you can make housing more affordable is reforming public education uh, in the K through 12 level. And you can get rid of NIMBY regulations in general and allow more high density development. And a lot of people are saying, oh, you're just going to want to turn everything into Manhattan. No, like I'll use California as another example. If you just increased the housing supply by 5 to 10%, it's kind of like oil, whereas in the oil market is very sensitive to marginal changes in supply and demand. So, like, even during the peak of like the pandemic, you maybe had oil consumption down 10%. I'm not don't give me exact. I don't know the exact number here, but it wasn't down like um, the amount the oil prices were down. Whereas oil went negative because just the marginal increase in supply relative to demand caused just an excess glut that couldn't be filled. And it could be the same with housing. Like if you just structurally have more houses than people, then you're going to have prices trending lower. This is what's happened in Japan for the last 30 years. So that's, um, yeah, there's a lot of policy room to make housing more affordable. And a lot of it's just simply just taking away the power of governments to restrict supply uh, and allowing more development and also reforming the school system and keeping a check on immigration or reversing immigration. So that's how you solve it. And so there's plenty of ways to skin the cat here. The next question really is regarding the tariffs topic. What do you think about the current trend? As some analysts talk about the end of globalization. Well, I mean, Peter Zahan is probably the most famous example. He just thinks the whole global trade system is going to shut down. I'm not really going to say that, but what could happen is you can have it split into two, like kind of like the Cold War style, where you have two different main trading blocks. You have the more um, restricted, onshored, liberal international order, and then you have the countries who are the non-aligned countries who have their own trade block, like a China-based trade block and a U.S. trade block. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that you have just you have global trade, but it's just a little bit less, kind of like the world and during the Cold War with the all the allied countries, but everybody participates in it. and or you maybe just get deals. Like I've been reading a lot of research about this, and I think it's an interesting idea is that how Nixon kind of opened China in the 70s um, into the general society and the global economy. Trump could be the one to make a deal with China. And if he makes a deal with China that China just says, hey, look, we'll just match whatever tariffs the US charges on our goods versus the US, and they actually make a deal and say, hey, look, we can have a new trade order that we could both cooperate, then maybe global trade can come. But and then we create a new rules-based order. There's a lot of ways we can go about this, but the idea that the US is just going to import everybody's goods and not charge them anything and let every other country charge high tariffs on American goods is not sustainable. We can't just subsidize global trade for everybody else. I think global trade will always be here. Global trade is a source of growth. Comparative advantage is a real thing, but it needs to be done in a way that doesn't just suck money out one way and going and lines every other country's pockets. And I think there will be a way to handle that. I'm not. I'll have to, but I don't really think it's going to be the end of globalization. But what they mean by the end of globalization is just it's going to be less globalization. I think there will be more in terms of trade of physical goods, especially due to the geopolitical imperative. However, I think in the service economy, you might see more globalization because in the era of work remote, why would you pay somebody a California wage for a software engineer when somebody in Vancouver or in London will do the same job for one third to one half the amount? Like I've seen the wage spreads for things like software developers, project managers, and UX designers between the US, Canada, and England. And given all these countries have the same levels of education and skills and English understanding and cultural affinities, why wouldn't a smart entrepreneur just hire his whole tech staff in Canada or the UK versus paying them double in the US? It absolutely makes no sense to me. And I talked about this in my video, San Francisco's next to Detroit, and I elaborated more on an interview I did with Chris Street about tech becoming a minimum wage job. And that is where I think you can see more globalization is in the service economy, particularly stuff that could be done remotely. Um, And the next question I have is from Daniel SLS. Is it possible to become wealthy as an employee? I save or invested 40% of my take home, and it seems like a long time to accumulate anything. Well, 40% is great, first of all, to save that. Um, you've got, if you could save 40% um, of your take home, that's pretty good. But it depends also what that is relative to your gross, because I generally advise people to save 25% of their gross if they can make it work without cramping their lifestyle too much. Beyond that is kind of just putting yourself in too much pain and not enjoying enough life at the expense of a fire dream. And if you don't save enough from that, you're not going to really make a meaningful dent in your savings. So that's kind of a good balance, right? Balancing act. Um, can you get rich as an employee? Yes, but the the way you can do there's only two ways. There's three ways you can do it, and they're just as difficult as being an entrepreneur, but they take different skill sets. The first one is moving up the corporate ladder and getting a C-suite job at a Fortune 500 company. That requires a master level skill in office politics, which and generally that's why CEOs and C-suites of corporations tend to have more sociopathic tendencies. There's a lot of psychological research on this. It's because to get that level, you need to be a master office politician. And most people just simply do not have the skills to do that, or have too much moral scruples to really do what it takes to fight in that game. And yeah, it's a different skill set than being an entrepreneur, but it's a very difficult game to play. I know friends who've tried to move up the ladder, and that's kind of the ones who have are very skilled at office politics, and the ones who aren't either leave to start their own businesses or get stuck. The next one is like sales. Um, like if you are a sales professional or somebody who can bring in revenue, you can negotiate a way that you will get a fair portion of your cut and what you're bringing in. And you don't have to be an entrepreneur. It's kind of like a hybrid role in a way. You can be you're taking entrepreneurial risk. You're the one bringing in customers, but you can have the stability of, say, like health insurance or a big company's product that you don't have to invent or design yourself. And that's a way you can get rich. And the sales skills is actually the most useful skill in moving up the social class hierarchy, whether it's in the establishment or the counter elite track. And I'll probably do a video about that in the future. So that's the second way you can get rich as an employee. The third way is you become a very good investor in stocks or real estate and have abnormal returns. That's not very easy to do, but and it's probably the least likely of the four I'm going to mention, but that is possible. The other way you get rich as an employee is you work in the buy side in finance. Um, like you can, like, if you work at like a hedge fund or an investment bank and your comp isn't paid a lot on bonus based on what your P&L is, or any profession where you have a P&L, like like a trader for a commodity house or a asset manager, hedge fund, options firm, whatever. That's the other way, like, because you're not necessarily have to be a salesman, but you get paid on your kill, and you can do that through trading or investing. So that's the other component way you can do it. And then there's also, if you just happen to be lucky and be one of the early employees at the next Facebook or Amazon or Google or Microsoft, but you can't really build a career strategy on hoping to find the next big company. Um, that's just, especially if you're not the one starting it and have any say in it, that's just a game of chance. But like the ways you can do it without playing a game of chance is having a P&L focused position in finance, having a sales bottom line type compensation, or moving up the ladder high enough. So those are the ways you get rich as an employee. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. You're a cost, and your boss's job is to get rid of you as a cost. And so that's my take on it. Zhao Gabriel says, Nick, you barely talk about the risk of a huge war. What is your risk evaluation in that? I'm very sanguine about geopolitical risk and war risk. If there was like an index for me to sell, like the VIX for geopolitics, I would be a consistent seller. And there's a few reasons why. One, there's only really two times where geopolitical risk was more than fear, and that was World War I and World War II. And in the age of nuclear weapons, total war like that between great powers is just not viable because of mutually assured destruction. And also the demographic things. One of the bright side of declining population is you have less young men to fight wars, and the cost of losing an individual one is much higher to your economic future. And so as a result, the risk reward calculation for war is a lot worse. And then the damage that wars do to economies. People who say wars are good for economies only think that, yeah, you might spend more building all these weapons, great, but you're not creating any actual value. The only time really somebody gets value out of war is if you defeat a country and plunder their resources. Like, the example would be Germany during World War II. Yeah, they showed a few good GDP prints making all those weapons, but when they lost the war, they lost all of that and more. Their stock market collapsed. Their economy just basically washed out completely, and they had to rebuild from complete scratch. Same with Japan. The only reason they recovered at all was because they got a lot of aid from the U.S. through the Marshall Plan and other things, because we wanted them as strategic allies in the Cold War. And so that is, wars are generally bad for the economy. It's like the broken window fallacy on steroids. So that those people who advocate for like wartime Keynesianism and stuff like that. And as a result, I don't know. I think that all the incentives align towards avoiding war, especially in the age of nuclear weapons. And as a result, I'm and also like there's other ways that countries can strike each other, like cyber attacks and more robotics and man-based combat. And so I'm more optimistic about peace in the world. Like nuclear weapons indirectly really is what the most dangerous weapon ever made is ironically has caused the golden age relatively for peace, especially in terms of lives lost in war as a percentage of the human population has never been lower than now. Uh, the next question is um, I got asked is from a senior. Nick, would you say there's a lack of skilled immigration entering the U.S.? No, I don't think there's a lack of skilled immigration entering the U.S. You know where you can tell where there's a lack of immigration, where you need immigration, is where people are being paid more than their talent. That's one of two reasons that happens. One, there's a bubble in that asset. Like for example, realtors were overpaid during the housing boom before the financial crisis. Um, and there's several other like the people mining in Australia in like the early 2010s were overpaid before China started to slow down. Like or the oil guys in the Bakken in like the mid 2010s. Like those are examples, but the a short of like a bubble creating an artificial level of demand for something the economy naturally doesn't need. Um, the only way that wages can be higher than talent is that when you have a real legitimate shortage in supply. And that's when you need more skilled immigration is if you don't have enough people who can actually, and these people, let's just say, for example, a coder whose productivity um, in a normal economy would be worth $150,000 a year. And they're being paid $300,000 a year because there's just not enough. That's where you have a real. That's when you show you have an actual labor shortage. When most politicians and policymakers say labor shortage, or economists complain about that, or lack of skilled labor, what they're saying is, I don't want to pay what the actual market rate is, and that's why we structurally have all these problems of people not being able to afford the cost of living and wages being lower than housing costs and being able to support families because you have the opposite problem. You have too much skilled labor relative to what the economy needs. And businesses like that because they can pay their employees less. That's what this is all about. Any complaint about a lack of jobs, a lack of skilled labor, or just a lack of labor in general, is usually companies think that they don't want to pay people like a living wage. And I am not like a high minimum wage person and all. In fact, I'm probably on the opposite side on that coin. But I don't really want to let in a bunch of skilled labor if there is not a legitimate shortage of people. Like, because all you're doing is just devaluing um, the productivity of your existing skilled and educated labor force. And I think part of the reason why we've had this election results that we've had is because people feel like they are being underpaid relative to the base cost of living. When the cost of living is high relative to incomes, that's a product of excess labor supply, not a lack of skilled labor. So the answer is no. And if you really want to have a policy to encourage like the real best and brightest, just have a law like Singapore had something similar to this. I think I've mentioned it in these lives before, or I think I might do a video about this idea on my economics of immigration. But just if you want to bring in a foreigner who's skilled labor, just be willing to pay them 20% above the market rate. If they're that much more talented than the local population, you'd have no problem doing it. And if they're not, then you should hire somebody locally. But that could be a solution to this whole thing. But yeah, the answer shortly is no. Um, we all right. Pet peeves. All right. So somebody asked me what's some of my pet peeves. One is driving in Los Angeles. I don't really like driving. I like the freedom of driving and having a car, but I don't like the stress of dealing with traffic and lack of parking. And you live in Southern California, you have a problem where you have to drive everywhere, but in a lot of places they don't have any parking. Like Mission Beach in San Diego is awful for this. Pretty much all of LA. It's part of the reason why I like living in Orange County, because we don't have this problem. Um, and so yeah, that's something that really stresses me out, is traffic and lack of parking and all this kind of stuff. And it's a pet peeve of mine. Just I don't know, people getting ghosted, from whether in the business world or your personal life or whatever, is a pet peeve of mine. And it's not enough sleep. Like, I'm not really somebody who gets hangry or anything like that, but if I don't get enough sleep or people make me stay up later than I need to, I get cranky real quick. So those are probably, I would say, my top pet peeves. Um, Vincent asked me, "Hi, do you have good work-life balance? What's your schedule like? How do you manage your time so well?" Um, I read a book in college called "Getting Things Done" by David Allen, and he basically, the main lesson from this book, and I still recommend you read it, but is that you should line up every hour by hour in the day what you're doing, so you know what you're supposed to be doing at all times. I know if I don't have like an hour by hour list or blocks all managed in time, I'll just sit back and relax and scroll on my phone, or play video games, or I don't know, take a nap, or if you don't have something to do and you leave these voids in your calendar, the void is going to be filled with wasted time. So that is my lesson for that. And I just have a lot to do in my life. I have a lot of ambitious goals, and this channel is just one of them. I run a wealth management firm full time, which is my main business, and I want to grow that and make it the next great financial firm out there. And that takes a lot of my time. I have a big family with a lot of relatives, so that takes a lot of my time. And then I have to have friends and a social life and dating and all that other things, and that takes time too, and exercise and staying in shape. And you gotta and any creative pursuits, or and then also like going to church and like other things. So you have a lot of I have a lot of stuff to do. And what I do is on Sunday nights, I will basically fill in hour by hour of stuff that's not already booked. Sometimes like meetings are scheduled or things before Sunday night the next week you got to do. And so you got to just fill in all the blanks. And so and then you know what you're going to do this week. So you don't have to think about, oh, what do I have to do? It's already kind of organized. The thing is, I'm very bad with is last minute changes. Like when people change plans last minute, I guess that might be in the pet peeve category. People change plans on me last minute. It irritates me because I built this like very efficient, like point A to point B type schedule. And if somebody just kind of takes one of the legs out, it's like the train's not going to run on time anymore. And so yeah, that's the one disadvantage of the way I do things, is that I get frustrated when people it's not flexible for less than a week out. But in general, it allows you to become a much more productive person. So yeah, that's kind of how I manage my time. And the other thing is, anything you can get done ahead, do it ahead. Like when I was in college, I was on a school with a quarterly system, and they would give me the syllabus the first week of school, and it would give you all the assignments and all the exams and the exact dates and all your readings. And I would try to get it all done by week 7. And as a result, in the last 3 weeks of the quarter, while everybody's cramming for finals, I just played golf and hung out at the beach. And that is it, because if you have everything planned, you are less stressed and you can get things done a lot better. And there's the follow-up question, do you equate time with money? Yes. Money is by definition, money is the amount of time that you don't have to work, essentially. Like if you look at it that way, like if you saved up, say, $1 million and your living expenses are 100 grand a year, that's you base that $1 million is 10 years that you don't have to work. And it's 10 years of free time. And if you look at money that way, and you look at time that way, you're going to be much more diligent with how you manage your time, and you'll also be less willing to spend money because you realize that money, if you spend that money, that's time that you're giving up for something that is probably not worth that time you are giving up. Um, Next question I have here is how much more? Okay, where are we in the business cycle? Um, I would have said before the election we are in the late cycle, um, and I still think there might be an adjustment period, especially in like in market cycles. The first year of any presidential term tends to be the worst one for financial markets, and often the worst one for the economy because it's kind of like the throwing the kitchen sink. You could blame the old management. This is what a lot of companies do when they have a new CEO. They have a kitchen sink quarter where they just throw all the bad junk right off the bat so they can have a much cleaner slate and lower expectations to build upon. And I think this happens with presidential terms to a lesser degree. And so you could have, especially if Trump's going to do serious structural reforms that I think are needed in the economy, there's going to be some pain. Like anything good is not earned easily. Anything worth having is hard. And so you might see some economic pain in the beginning um, of the new administration, but at the same time, it will hopefully set a healthier foundation for the future. Or we could possibly just skip it outright and it can go straight to the moon from here. But that's what I think the market is hoping for based on current valuations. But I think it's more likely you're going to see a little bit of a lull early next year. And then we're going to be off to the races in a way that will even surprise the optimists now. The next thing is what is a proxy for the average real inflation rate? Like, is it white collar salary growth rate, average earnings, U.S. S&P 500 returns, etc.? Well, no, because S&P 500 returns are a proxy for nominal GDP, which includes real growth plus inflation. So S&P 500 returns should be higher than the inflation rate. I would say a good proxy for this would be the price of gold if you stretch it out to a long time. Or is it as for just pure inflation? Or just use the current inflation rate, add 30% over a long period of time. Because it's very cyclical. Like during the times when inflation is low or declining, it's probably lower than what the data says. And when it's high and rising, it's higher than the data says, and even higher than the 30% fudge factor. Next question I have is from Enrique. And he asks, can you do the economics of the idea of adding a 51st state? And what are your candidates for the next states? I don't really think a 51st state is going to happen anytime soon because you have to add 2 senators. And there really isn't a prospective state that's going to be 1 senator for each party. If I had I have a lot of suggestions on what would be a 51st state. Like if I was dictator of America, how I would do it. One, I would split California into 2 states. Somebody who lives in Southern California and has very different politics than San Francisco, I don't really like being in the same state as San Francisco and Sacramento. And most people in the southern and eastern parts of this state probably would agree with that because we don't feel very represented in our politics. So, like, I don't know, put Long Beach as like the border, and everything west of Long Beach would be a state, and everything east of Long Beach would be like the Central Valley, Orange County, San Diego, Riverside, Palm Springs area, and Mammoth and all that would be a state. And you split California down east and west. Or if you just did it north and south and you just did like everything Santa Barbara County and south as one state and everything north of Bakersfield as the other state, that would be probably a good one. I mean, there's the idea of Greenland becoming a state, but the population just isn't there to do that. Like they only have like 50,000 people in the entire landmass the size of Mexico. And I think even in the Constitution, you have to have a minimum of 60,000 people to even be considered a state. So that is the other thing I would be talking about when it comes to a 51st state. Puerto Rico is another one that's commonly mentioned. Uh, but Puerto Rico's economy and its fiscal situation is not really in good enough shape to earn statehood. If they could fix their finances, maybe I would think that'd be a good idea. But they have a lot of work to do. Um, yeah, I mean Alberta is another one because it's kind of culturally more like the U.S. and yet it's part of Canada, which has a very different political orientation. Uh, or BC, just so that you can have um, Alaska and the lower 48 connected contiguously would be another potential 51st state, even though its politics is very progressive. Um, those would probably be the candidates that I would mention: splitting California, Puerto Rico, Greenland, BC, or Alberta. Uh, Next question is I have is as an ambitious person who's most likely to end up as new money, any advice on how to navigate society? That's a very broad one. Um, you just have to be very careful with how who you trust, because as you move up the ranks, there's a lot of people who just want to latch onto your coattails to move up their own goals, whether socially or for business. Um, that's probably my biggest lesson. And the other thing is yeah, that's your main lesson in navigating society. You got to figure out what people's real intentions are and keep a low profile. Um, and not, and if you're going to have a don't flash wealth. Um, you can privately, but if you do before you really made it to the top, you're going to attract the wrong kind of crowd. Uh, Next thing I have is intellectual property protection is used by old money to prevent new money from catching up. No, I'd actually disagree. I think that intellectual properties what allows new money to form. Because if you had no intellectual property, some established old money business or individual can just use their resources to copy your innovation and take you out of the market before you have a chance to accumulate wealth. So I fundamentally disagree with that idea. Um, then let's see. Have you made any content on subprime markets? No, I have not made any content on subprime markets. It's not really an expertise of mine, and I haven't really been focused on that really since '08. So um, it's not. It's probably not something I'm going to do anytime soon. Is Ray Dalio right, and the U.S. is doomed for a complete currency devaluation? I'm not going to answer any questions about Ray Dalio because I did a 3-hour, 3-part series about Ray Dalio about 2 years ago, reacting to his famous viral video about the changes of great powers. You can go watch that um, on your own. And if you've watched that and you have questions afterwards, then I'll answer those on a future live stream. But if you please watch the series I did on Ray Dalio first, because I don't want to repeat myself and I don't want to waste the whole chat redoing that video. Next question. Let's learn economics. How do you handle stress? What's your daily suggestion for a balanced lifestyle that allows you to perform mindset, diet, and activities? Thank you. My main way to relax for stress, de-stress is jacuzzis and hot tubs. Like, I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke. Um, I try to stay away from eating too much desserts. And I used to play a lot of video games as a kid and a teenager, but I try to not do that either, unless if I've accomplished like everything else I need to do for like a whole week or a month or an airplane. I have the Nintendo Switch mainly to use when I on a plane. It's the best thing to do to kill time on a flight is playing Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, uh, or the Nintendo Switch Online with all the retro N64 games. But yeah, so and watching baseball used to be another way I used to de-stressify, but the Angels are terrible. I'm not going to waste my time watching them at this point. Uh, And then also just spending time with your friends and family is a good way to reduce stress, or talking to, if you have a real problem, talking about it with somebody else who's a friend of yours, not like a paid therapist, so you can blow off some steam that way. And getting plenty of sleep, and like, yeah, that's kind of the ways I would terms of stress. I mean, like, and then working out to a certain degree helps with that too. Um, but yeah, I tend to be a little bit higher strung than the average person, so maybe I might not be the one to give advice when it comes to stress. Um, yeah, diet, again, avoiding sugar and alcohol, probably. Activities, yeah, some sort of exercise, and just after a certain time of the day, you just got to turn off like work and things like that. That helps too. But I'm fortunate. I mean, my stress levels will probably go up whenever I get married and have children. And then maybe you'll have to ask me that question then. Um, yeah. Let's see. Do you feel um, wrong in the things you say, and you'll change how you feel about something constantly? Well, when the facts change or my perception of the facts change, I change my mind. I think that's, yeah, sometimes I've been wrong. I've said some stupid things probably on this channel, to be quite honest, and my opinions have changed. Next one is, are you only doing YouTube, or do you also have a TikTok and an Instagram? I do have an Instagram. I have it mainly just to prove to my friends and my relatives that I'm not dead, and I could see what kind of some of my people I don't talk to every day are doing who are in my life. But I don't really post on Instagram. It's at the Nicholas Pardini. I have an X. I sometimes post videos and retweet random things that are interesting, but I'm not very active on there. I don't have TikTok, and I never really plan on having a TikTok. I've thought about have doing a joint venture with a friend of mine who would just basically run my TikTok for me in exchange for half the revenues, because I just don't want to deal with it. But I do see the opportunity there, but I don't have one. I don't really plan on doing it. Um, Hey, Nick, is it possible to become part of the establishment elite or very close ally without going to an Ivy League or being from a high a high status family? Apparently, my chat got disconnected, but I guess it's back now. So, um, in terms of yeah, you can go into the establishment elite. Again, if you have very good office politics skills, or you get involved in actual politics. Like, that's how people get involved in the uh the top echelons without being born into it, is be playing the game of politics, whether it's actual electoral politics or office politics at big companies, NGOs, academia, etc. That's how you do it. You got to play politics. And to be quite frank, I'm not very good at that. So that's why I don't really, and most people are not. And particularly probably people on YouTube who watch my channel and study these kind of things. Because if they were, they would just be doing that. It's a personality type. Uh, yeah, so that's all the pre questions, but that doesn't mean we're far from over on this channel. Now I'm going to start getting into the actual chat. And if, again, those are all the carryover ones from last time, and this is really popular. So if you want to make sure that your question does get answered, please do a super chat, because I can't guarantee everybody's going to get their questions answered. But if you want to be on the top of the line, do that. Other updates I'd like to share with you guys is we have our first location announced for the Analyzing Finance with Nick tour. It's going to be in Las Vegas, Nevada on December 7th, 2024. I will have a link posted in a community post tomorrow with all the details about that. But if you happen to be in Vegas or want to come down to Vegas to meet me, that's going to be the first stop. And then we have a lot of other cities voted on already by you guys. And I think it's in the description of this live stream and a lot of my other videos, but there's a poll, a survey that you can fill out what cities you want me to come for the 2025 Analyzing Finance with Nick tour. I'd love to meet as many of you as I can on this. And if I get enough votes, I will stop by. But the cities that already have enough votes for me to come are going to be Orange County, California, San Diego, Vegas, which I've already mentioned, San Francisco, San Jose, but we're going to put the San Jose one in Santa Cruz. So you might have to drive down the 17, but I will be in the South Bay area adjacently at least. New York City, Boston, Washington, D.C., Austin, Texas, Chicago, Seattle, or Vancouver, one of the two. And internationally, we have enough people in the country of Switzerland. That's the first international country that got enough votes for me to attend. And other places that are close but not yet have the votes are Miami, Guadalajara, Mexico, surprisingly, Spain, and the Bahamas, and Dallas, Texas. But those are other places that are likely to be in consideration. But yeah, but those don't quite have the votes yet. But so that's my update on the Analyzing Finance and Nick tour. The only one we're going to be doing this calendar year is Las Vegas, and then the rest of them will be in 2025. And for timing, as you know, I don't like the snow. I don't like cold weather or extreme heat. So whenever it's the most mild time of the year for your city is probably when I'm going to go there. And then the next, so that's the update on the tour. And then before I get into other things on the channel, I got a super chat. Thoughts on Bitcoin? What do you think about the nature of crypto market cycles? I'm not a fan of Bitcoin. And this is probably going to anger a lot of my audience. I think that cryptocurrency in general has no intrinsic value whatsoever. And I think that it's an inferior version of gold. People can trade and speculate on it and make money on trading the technicals and the chart patterns. But in terms of like long-term investment, it's just a pure form of speculation. Bitcoin has no corporate earnings. Bitcoin has no interest payment. It has no physical use case, really. So it's really just you're betting on animal spirits and whether you're going to have greater fools buying more of it or less of it. I mean, I only short it when they're about to release a new like product that gets people hyped up, like a new financial product to indirectly invest in it, or if I just see like a crazy like entry point, but the risk of reward of shorting it isn't that great either. So I kind of just don't really touch Bitcoin that much. However, I think Bitcoin relative to the other cryptocurrencies has a bit more staying power just due to branding and the fact that it's gotten like the attention it has and has a lot of higher ranked people supporting it. But it's kind of the cleanest dirty shirt, for a lack of a better term. I'm not really a particularly big fan of Bitcoin, and if I wanted to pick an anti-fiat trade, I personally would rather be in gold. And with that, I'm going to say nothing in this video or live streams investment advice. If you have specific questions about your own financial situation or like specific investments or anything like that, please contact me directly. You can do it through the contact form on my website, nickpardini.com, or email me. This is what I do for a living for clients, is wealth management, investment management stuff. So yeah, if you have anything for your specific situation, just contact me directly there. This is more of a macro conversation, both these live streams and just my channel as a whole. So yeah, let's get into some of these chats before I get back to like other developments in the channel, so I don't spend like 20 minutes just advertising all the things I'm doing here with this channel. Let's see. What are your favorite things that Trump will do during his second term? I think actually having a coherent immigration policy and stop letting in everybody walking across the border is a good step in the right direction. I like the idea of just more favorable tax environment for businesses. If he could pull off the replacing the income tax with a tariff, that would be great. I'd have to look into the numbers on it and whether that's viable or not. But it's an innovative idea, and that's how our government did work before the 16th Amendment. So I'm not really totally opposed to that. A tariff is just another tax, but it's a better tax than income tax. So if I had to make a trade, that's not a terrible one to make. And I like the idea of the Department of Government Efficiency too. I mean, the solution to the fiscal deficit problem isn't raising taxes. Um, and I will do a video about the math about how much you would have to raise taxes to fix the problems. And it's possible, but it's very painful. And it's better off really just lowering spending. That's what we need. That's something I've always disagreed with Donald Trump, but the fact he's bringing in people like Elon Musk wants to bring in like one of the OG like anti-establishment Republicans, Ron Paul, onto the team, that's very exciting actually. So yeah, those are some of the stuff I would say that I particularly like. Um, Future of the Republican and the Democratic Party. Uh, I think that um, I think politics in general is going to get less polarized. I think it's very important that President Trump won the popular vote uh, versus like just winning the way he did in 2016 or having it super close and being dragged out to votes counted days later. It really restores integrity and confidence in democracy. When one side believes they cannot win fairly, then they're more willing to resort to doing things that aren't really good for the health of the democratic system. And the fact that this was kind of resolved the way it has, and that Trump's going to get termed out, and so we're not going to have a chance of this repeating. Uh, that I think that's a good thing. I think for the country, and I think that I think both parties are trending more towards are going to become more socially conservative, more economically left. Like libertarianism, even though I have some sympathies with it personally, is not popular and it's probably going to die out. That's kind of I think the collective lesson really here is that you're going to have both, even though we'll have one party who's maybe more fiscally conservative than the other and one that's more socially conservative than the other. I think the general trend for politics in general is the voting bloc is going to get increasingly more socially conservative and more fiscally expansionary or left wing, but they'll be kept in check by the bond market. Now we have real interest rates, and we've seen reactions like what happened with trusts in Britain when you get too fiscally profligate. And so that's going to be the check, not necessarily electoral decisions on ultra loose fiscal policy. Should you move to the US as a software engineer living in EU country? How do you see the future of the EU economy? Yeah, I would, just because of the wage gap. Like I have a family member who started her career as a UX designer in London, and when she moved to the United States, it tripled her salary. This was like a few years ago. And that gap is going to fill, but it's still there. So yeah, my answer is yeah, if you have the opportunity to legally move to the US for your skills to do that for software, you should take it. How do you see the future of the EU economy? Well, I don't see it's very good, but the expectations are so low that there might be actually opportunities for upside surprise, especially if there's some sort of peace deal in Ukraine and energy costs come down due to just deregulation of energy and climate change paranoia declining. Europe does not produce its own energy; it's an importer. And if you can have a world with more affordable energy, and that could be the catalyst for Europe recovering. And with Europe's demographic curve inverting, they could have much more affordable housing, and that ironically could kick back the birth rates up and kind of reignite Europe's boom for things simply just get more affordable as the population supply demand balances each other out. And also, like you might have hit the limits of the consequence of recent developments in Europe in terms of immigration and fiscal austerity is that they might actually have to make real economic reforms, and there's not going to be the political will for the generous welfare state like there was, say, 20 or 30 years ago. Like the millennial and Gen Zs in Europe are more conservative on economic they can make their economies more competitive like the United States, that would make me pretty bullish on Europe, especially given how low um, expectations are just basically on the floor there right now. All right, I got another super chat. Um, what do you think about the what happened in 1971 website and general message it's spreading? Does it have merit? Thanks for answering my Bitcoin question, and I love your channel. Well, yeah. What happened? I did a video about 1971 like 2 or 3 years ago. It's a reaction to a Jake Tran video. Um, and this was about the gold standard. And yeah, I'm sympathetic to the gold standard. Money is better when it's hard. And the crypto people understand that inherently too. I just think crypto is not the way to make money hard. But unless if you had like a gold backed or a real estate backed or some sort of hard asset backed crypto, I'd be all for it. And so, yeah, 1971 was the turning point. That's when people's real wages didn't catch up with productivity. It's when a lot of it's when housing became unaffordable. I did a video called "Housing Isn't Expensive, You're Just Poor." And it shows real estate in gold per ounces. It's flat, even in Southern California and rich coastal communities. The house that I could buy, say for 1,000 ounces of gold in 1997, I can buy an even bigger house with 1,000 ounces of gold today. So, yeah, I generally agree. Assuming that I've never seen that website, but assuming it's talking about Nixon removing the gold peg, yeah, I think that was a tragedy in this country, and it was a response to Lyndon Johnson running our finances in the ground with guns and butter, Vietnam War, and the Great Society. So, yeah, that's my answer to your question. Let's see. Give tariff discounts to companies with X percentage of employees as onshore. I don't think that wouldn't really solve the policy goals. I don't think that would make a difference. Do you think the West as a whole will follow the U.S. and gravitate towards conservative values? I think that the immigration, if that's the case, the U.S. kind of started to come towards the European values in a way. I think the West is kind of a symbiotic collection of countries that exchanges ideas, and the bits and best of them hopefully are the ones that are used across the entire Western world. But yeah, I mean, I think Europe's going to have to become more conservative because they've ran the fiscal end of the line. They're going to have no choice. Australia and New Zealand and Canada, different story. I don't really see Canada has built its national identity on being against America, and what is defined as America is right-wing economics and capitalism and Christianity to a certain degree is like the rudely American beliefs. And so Canada likes, as part of their sense of nationalism, is that their Canadian nationalism is inherently left-wing and anti-America. So I don't think Canada will get on board. I think the rest of them can, though. Compared to what you pay in taxes to your rent, you need to open a business. Let's see. That's not a question. All right. Is Trump good for the economy, for the middle class, or just for the rich? I think Trump is I don't know if you've seen my video about voting with social class, but I think that generally Trump is good for the middle class and above in America. He's not good for the overeducated and underemployed, and he's not good for the lower classes. And he's not good for government workers. So it really depends on what type of job you have. But in general, if more right-wing leaning economics means more after-tax money in people's hands, and deregulation allows more increases in supply, and the tariffs are a mixed bag because the tariffs are going to increase prices for import goods, but these are mostly discretionary goods, like necessities, things like food, energy, housing are domestically produced. So the people, if they really, the price hikes they're going to see from tariffs are avoidable if they change their consumption habits. And it really also depends on if those tariffs are going to come with tax cuts elsewhere. Like, because tariff is just another tax. That's how you have to look at it. And if you've raised the tariffs without any tax cuts elsewhere, yeah, that's going to be a net loss for America. If you can cancel it out with tax cuts elsewhere, it's probably a net positive. So, yeah, and in terms of tax cuts, the reason why they disproportionately affect the rich because the rich disproportionately pay taxes. Um, America is one of the most steeply progressive tax brackets. Like in European countries, everybody pays high taxes. I did this in my Economic Future of Belgium video. Like if you make more than 60,000 USD, you're paying half your income to the government. Whereas you don't hit the 50% bracket unless if you live in a blue state and are making more than $1 million a year. So even though like the top marginal rate is the same in most of the world, it matters where that top marginal rate kicks in. Let's see. You did a video about the president not being able to influence the economy, but we see a simple jump after Trump was elected. Well, it's not just that Trump was elected, because if he was elected and the Democrats kept one of the two chambers of Congress, he would have really not much power except for immigration. So the fact that he won and he won with the Congress, that means he has a lot more political flexibility to actually enact economic change. And then and also the Supreme Court happens to be on his side too. And then on top of that, you have the fact that he won the popular vote is restoring confidence in the electoral system. So a lot of the market was scared about uncertainty, about unrest, or something going bad. I think the market was more scared about the reaction to the losing side than the actual election. And now that we have a very clean result that was decided quickly, that the market feels a lot more confident about the social and political stability in the United States. And I think that is just as big, if not a bigger driver of this rally than simply Trump getting elected. Let's see. Thoughts on, yeah, sure. The question about thoughts on a right-leaning House, Senate, President, Supreme Court, will it be more productive for new policy? Yeah, I think the next 2 years will be. I mean, the midterms are going to come up 2 years from now, and I think that there's maybe a 15 to 20% chance that the Republicans keep the House in 26. Based on the history of midterm elections, the opposing party usually gains at least 5 to 10 seats. And based on the House projections, they're going to maybe have a 5 to 7 seat majority. But every seat you flip is effectively 2 because the other party gains 1. So if the Republicans lose 5 seats, that's effectively going to turn a 220 to 215 Congress one way to a 220, 215 the other way in the House. So the stuff he's gonna have 2 years to get things done. The only thing he's really, and then otherwise, is just going to be a foreign policy only type president. And yeah, I think and again, let's see who he picks in the cabinet, because Trump had this in 2016, and due to maybe his inexperience or picking the wrong people around him, they didn't get as much done. Healthcare reform failed, and they got tax reform, and they did do something on immigration, but there was a lot of chips left on the table that could have been had. And then the 2018 midterms kind of just destroyed any chance of really any meaningful reform beyond that. So hopefully the administration learned their lessons from last time around and can be more competent. But the perspective I want to leave to all you guys here is that the main lesson to learn from this election is, now that what my viewers should hope for is that the election results means that politics is not going to interfere too much with what you're doing in your day-to-day life privately now. This election is effectively the green light that says, you know what? The government's not getting in your way anymore, or at least they will a lot less than they used to. Just go and build yourself. Your success and failure is not going to be affected by Donald Trump or the Democrats or the Republicans or anything. It's all on you now. So you're the master of your own life. And that is really what we want as America. We want to be able to build businesses or do it, achieve our dreams, and have little blockage from politics or anything government related as possible. So use this opportunity to go out there and build things and make things happen in your own life, whether business wise or personally. Um, let's see. Can you do vids on the central banks like the BIS? I kind of want to do a narrative series on the Federal Reserve and its history. I'm not very good at video editing and production to make it very smooth. And I don't know if people would want to watch a video of me just narrating my take on the history of the Federal Reserve and what happened and stuff like that without really nice animations and graphics. And yeah, so I thought about it before making the documentary style videos is that I had until I either have the budget to hire a good team to make that for me, or if I ever have the time to actually learn those kind of skills. I was kind of saving the history of the Fed and deep dive into things like the BAS for that point. But if you want me to make it earlier on less type of production style or simpler production style, leave stuff in the comments. But that's kind of what I was waiting on for that one. Um, yeah. What is your view on the law and supply and demand related to Ivy League college class sizes? I think Ivy League college class sizes are way too small. Like the American population has grown a lot, yet the Ivy League class sizes have barely increased. It should have grown at least proportionate to population, if not more. I'm generally for giving more opportunities to people without devaluing the standards. Like the CFA program was kind of a good example of this. Anybody can take the test, but if the test is hard enough, only a certain amount of people are going to pass the test. And if you have more people taking the test and more underqualified people taking the test, then the pass rates are going to go down. And people don't want to see a lot of people measure, sadly, the prestige of schools on two things. One, on selectivity, like how few people they let in. The fact that you let few people in doesn't mean it's better quality in any way. That's just kind of snobbery. And then the second thing they look at too is graduation rate. Like schools look at graduation rates as a sign like, oh, I'm a high quality school. I graduate. 90% of the people who go to my school or 95% of the people in my school graduate. Well, that's how you look at the other way around. Why don't you just have higher failure rates? Like you can let more people in. And even the thing is that there's so much smart people in this country that like Harvard and Princeton and Columbia and Yale and schools like this at Stanford, they have to reject like half the people who have perfect SAT scores. And they reject like 3/4 or more of the people who have perfect GPAs. So it's not like we have a shortage of qualified, talented people. I think you let more people in, but do not lower or maybe even increase the difficulty of finishing the degree. And the fact that it might be too hard for people to make it through might disincentivize people to apply. Because right now, the hardest part of an Ivy League education is getting into the school. And getting into the school, it could be challenging, but I think the thing is that, again, I want to offer more opportunities without diluting the standard. I think graduating should mean more than getting in. I mean, if I'm crazy on this, let me know, but that just seems to be my take. I think you should expand access, but don't dilute the standard. And the natural result that's going to be higher attrition and failure rates, but this is America. It's about people getting opportunities and making the best or not the best of it and sinking or swimming on their own merit. Um, let's see. Next question. A quarter of Canada's GDP is dependent on the housing market. What does this exactly mean? I recommend watching my video on the economic future of Canada I did in December of 2023. And when it comes to the economic future of Canada, like it means that you're investing too much money in non-productive assets. Like residential real estate is a non-productive asset. Like people have to live somewhere, sure, but like it doesn't generate any value or any new value add. And so like as a result, it's just going to slow on growth. But yeah, I I got another super chat. Someone else asked a really good question about post-labor economics and AI. I wanted to highlight. Do you think AI is going to lead to massive job losses? And so where will displaced workers go? Yes, I think it will lead to major job losses. Um, even if I don't think everybody in every field is going to be removed, but um, I think what's going to happen is, say, like a law firm that needed 10 lawyers is going to need two maybe now. And that's enough losses to be socially destabilizing. And yeah, I think that there's a few things that this can happen. One, you can have natural attrition. You just have the aging population, a lot of people just retiring, and lower birth rates mean less young people are there to replace them. And you just have to put a stop to immigration. Uh, that that might be one. The other thing is that the remaining jobs that can't be replaced by AI, wages go high enough that you can maybe switch to one income earning households, and that might and whoever the most productive person is of either gender is the breadwinner, and there's another person who stays home and raises the family or takes care of elderly parents or something else like that. That could be another thing. Then there will also be new jobs created in other industries. Like, somebody's going to have to make sure this AI and robotics work properly and manage a lot of that. Um, or you're going to have a real, true post scarcity society that people really won't need to work, or the cost of living will go so much lower due to efficiency gains that you can work less hours and be able to retire faster, or you won't, or you can cover your cost of living on on less hours of work. It's not a guarantee that people have to get poorer relative to wages. Like, that's just a phenomenon post 1971 inflation world. If we had a more deflationary based economy, like say from like the late 19th century to 1913, you had living standards going up through wages staying the same and price levels dropping. Since governments are the biggest debtors in the world, they don't really like that, but that is um, that is an alternative way of handling this. But I got to think more about it. This is just kind of a half baked answer. Uh, how did I get Canada in this conversation? Well, Canada is kind of a allegory for a lot of policy experiments that, especially in things like immigration and housing and natural resource policy, that the U.S. can learn from and not repeat if it's a bad policy. And unfortunately, really over the last several years, Canada has not really had the best governance for a variety of reasons. Do you feel optimistic about the current counter elites, such as Elon Andreessen's ability to take on the institutional elite? Well, they kind of just beat them with this election, and they might become the new institutional elites. Like, for example, RFK and his impact in the Health and Human Services Department may lead to the banning of pharmaceutical ads on television. And given how much percentage of ad revenue comes from those kind of things, the mainstream media might have some financial consequences to do that. That could just be it. So there might just be a realignment where these guys become the new establishment. And then there'll be an event 20 or 30 years from now when they get too fat and happy. They'll probably be a new counter elite. That's just how cycles work. So I think, but yeah, I think I'm optimistic about them taking him on because they just did with this recent election. Speaking of, all right, yeah, I just answered this question, Nick, but thank you for the super chat. Uh, let's see. If you had to live in a country, thoughts on Bitcoin? I already answered that. If you had to live in a country in Europe, where would it be? You probably guys know the answer to this one. It would be Switzerland. But I would particularly live in, especially if money wasn't an object or could move my business anywhere, it would be probably Lugano, Switzerland, specifically the Italian part. Even though I'm not Swiss Italian myself, Um, you get like the timeliness and the efficiency and the quality governance of Switzerland, but you get the slightly more mild climate and the Italian food and the Catholicism of Italy. So you kind of get the best of both worlds in Ticino. So that's probably where I would go in Europe. Is I'd live in Ticino, Switzerland, the Ticino canton of Switzerland. I am Swiss, so I'm a little biased on that. If I was older and retired and didn't have a business, like Spain and Italy wouldn't be so bad. But if you're an entrepreneurial younger person who's trying to build something, those aren't really countries you really want to be in until they change their economic policy. So yeah, but they probably have the best climate and lifestyle in terms of like countries in Europe would be Spain and coastal Italy, um, particularly like Tuscany, Liguria, and like that area. And for Spain, just be like the Mediterranean coast. But yeah, I would probably live in Switzerland. Also, I have family in Switzerland, so that makes it a much easier choice. The problem is I don't speak any of the languages. I'm only an English speaker, so I'd have to brush up my Italian or my German, Swiss German. Let's see. What do you think of Texas opening the stock exchange? The implications of it for the market? Well, it just provides competition, and if they can make stock trading more cheaper or more efficient than the NYSE, it just means we'll have more liquidity and better quality financial markets. It's just another competitor. I don't really think it's going to change the dynamic of how the markets work. I don't know enough about the Texas exchange to really have a strong opinion about it. Maybe I'll do a video on it, but I got to do more research. What are your thoughts about tech ESG with lower than average EBITDA with while overload debt in the tech sector? Do you see a potential crisis in 1 to 2 years? I think any company that has too much debt, it's ultimately going to have its day of reckoning. I think you could see a growth slowdown in a lot of tech, especially if it's not related to AI. But I'm not going to get into specific views on tech stocks here on this stream. But yeah, because I don't really know. I'd have to look at it's an individual company at company basis. I would look at their economic modes, how much debt they have, how sustainable I believe their cash flows are, um, etc. Have you read the book The Bell Curve? Is that the one by Charles Murray? Pancon Bistec. I have read it. I have mixed views on it, but I want to make sure I'm referring to the right book before I answer more on that. What did he say about Toronto? Well, I don't have enough votes yet for Toronto. So if I need more Torontonians who want me to come to Toronto to make their voices heard before I have a Toronto meetup. And let's see. What areas will grow into new money hubs over the next 15 years? What are your sleeper picks for cities that may not know about? This is my last question. Thanks for this amazing live. Okay. Well, I mean, they're kind of on a city by city basis. Like every metro area has a suburb that could become a new money hub. Like for example, in Southern California where I live, I think those potential new money places are like the South Coast of Orange County, like Dana Point, if it would be a good one, or even Huntington Beach potentially could be a new money enclave, or North County, San Diego for San Diego, and Santa Cruz for the Bay Area, and Napa area for the Bay Area as well. But like in terms of like new metro areas, it really first of all depends on how successful work remote is, and if people and whether once the boomers are fully phased out of the workforce, how much is the back to office thing. But I think there's certain places like Idaho, like Coeur d'Alene, like resort type towns, Teton County is already kind of an older. It's could expand a little bit, but it's already kind of an old money enclave like Jackson Hole and all that. But yeah, I think Montana has potential, like the area around Big Sky and Bozeman. It already starting, but the winters are kind of what keep people away. So it'd be kind of like how we have snowbirds who go to Florida and Arizona in the winter. Maybe the snowbirds will just have their summer home in Montana and their winter home in either Arizona or in Florida. Um, I think Tampa area has potential as well um, in Florida, and like that, and like just in general, just like the area between um, Miami and Tampa along the west coast and the and a little bit north, like Jupiter and areas in Florida, if they already haven't become that. Uh, yeah, Hawaii. It's already, I think, very expensive, but like I think that if Hawaii could possibly also become a hub because a lot of wealthy people already want to live there. Internationally, I'd have to think about it, but yeah, those are things off. I think there's going to be like a new money, emerging new money neighborhoods really in every major metropolitan area. So I don't know if there's going to be a one from scratch or a specific region of the U.S. I just think again, it's the places right now that have like the higher income professionals, like doctors, lawyers, um, and small business owners. They're upper middle class communities that are nice, but they're not really flooded with new money. In any city where that's kind of the dominant demographic, that's where the once the current new money areas get crowded, that's where they go next. That's my simple take on it. I don't think there's really a single metro area. If they allowed more development, Santa Barbara is already kind of an old money place, but due to development restrictions, there's a lot of relatively empty land. Central coast of California, I think, would have a lot of potential if there was less environmental restrictions on development. But yeah, Pyongyang. No, there's never going to be an analyzing finance of Nick tour in Pyongyang. Uh, Sorry, North Korean fans, if there are any. Um, let's see. I'm, I need to get back to scrolling up on these questions. So just give me a second. The super chat kind of let me lost my place here. All right, where would you rank yourself on your neuroticism scale of 1 to 5? Um, I think I'm probably for the population as a whole, I'm probably a 2, but compared to like other productive men, I'm probably like a 4. Like, yeah. I mean, I do think a lot about the left tail. I mean, it helps me do with risk management in my profession, but when that extends to your personal life, it's not healthy. Um, let's see. What about DeFi? Um, like, are you talking about like yield farming and stuff like that? I'm not a fan. I think it's again, you're creating a solution without a problem, and it's just speculating on. It's just further layers of leverage on an existing speculative asset. Um, would a tariff be good for building the American economy, as Trump states? Um, I think there are strategic reasons why you might want to build more stuff domestically, especially like if the world gets more tense. Um, I think that tariffs are another tax. I mean, if you just do a tariff alone without any other changes, um, I think that it's a net bad. If you do tariffs and you restructure the economy in other ways to make up for the tariffs, then it could be good. I mean, again, in terms of I think a lot of the goals that a lot of these people who are voting on tariffs for is they want more manufacturing employment. And I don't think you're going to get that much new employment from these tariffs. First of all, unemployment, even though it's rallied a little bit, is still not that high. Second, and more importantly, in order for manufacturing to be competitive, you're going to have to do it with robotics and machinery. So you're going to bring all this stuff here, but it's going to be made by bots. You'll have a few jobs for engineers and repair tech and software designers for the bots, but you're not going to have like the guy who shows up and works at the factory for 40 hours a week screwing in a widget and being able to buy a house and live a comfortable middle class lifestyle on a low skill job. That's a pipe dream. Um, let's see. Any concern with inflation coming back? Yes, there are. I have some concerns with inflation coming back. Um, yeah, especially if there's nothing done on the supply side for housing. Because if the Fed cuts rates and you have already the enthusiasm of the recent election results and other things, there is a risk that that just leads to more speculation in housing, and that drives up wage demands because if you can't afford to move to the neighborhood, the city that your job is in, you're going to need to demand a higher wage to adjust for the price level, and then it kickstart the price wage spiral. So yeah, I'm not saying that oh no, inflation's coming, but the people who say it's done and never coming back, um, yeah, that's a little bit naive. I think the inflation risk is real and still there. Uh, would you consider golf a sport? And somebody else asked me, is that how is my golf game? I'm not very good at golf. It's the one hobby that I don't get mad when I lose. So I really enjoy playing it, but I don't have time for it very much. I maybe go out 4 to 5 times a year right now. I wish I had more time for it, but yeah, it's a fun and unfortunately live in a place where I can golf all year round and not have to deal with winter. But yeah, golf is a sport. It requires some sort of physical activity and a motor skills that can help you get better at it. Is it as athletically exhausting? Is it a good workout? Absolutely not. Like you're not going to get in peak physical shape by playing golf unless if you're maybe if you're walking a lot and carrying your clubs, that could be like a way you can, but like the way that generally golfers play, no. It's more of a skill based sport. Like that's like asking, is archery a sport or is bowling a sport? And I would argue that those are sports. And if those are sports, then golf is definitely a sport. Um, let's see. Are you opposed to high skilled immigration, especially from international students coming to get the US or use the highest tuition? I am not necessarily opposed to high skilled immigration. Like if you're going to a top university, that means you probably are more talented than the median person. You probably are 20% more talented than the median American worker. And we want the best and the brightest coming to this country. And yeah, I just don't want skilled immigration to be used as a way to devalue the wages of your average American. So there's a smart way to go about it. You want to have an immigration policy that encourages the best and brightest people to come here and allows the future great entrepreneurs to come here. Like say if you have an idea that's sufficiently venture backed or financed, self-financed that you can support yourself without relying on the state. I want that guy or girl to be here too. The great entrepreneurs. But I don't really want this to be used as a loophole for companies to undercut wages. So, yeah, I'm for skill bringing in the best skilled labor from overseas, and I'm fine with international students being here. I think they enrich the country in their own way, but it just needs to be done in an intelligent manner. Yes, the book by Charles Murray. Uh, yeah. Um, yeah, I know bisteca is Spanish for steak. I know some Spanish. Yeah, I think there are some mixed things. I think I have some mixed views on it. I mean, one, it does point out some real issues, like an IQ is a real metric. I don't like. I think that, um, and that, but I'm not. I There are some valid points, but I think the Flynn effect is not being a part of or accounted for properly with some of the data in there in terms of different groups and outcomes. I think a lot of intelligence outcomes is also driven by cultural factors that cause people not to live up to their potential, to be quite frank. And I think that's the one missing component to the bell curve, is that they don't factor in cultural reasons that why certain groups of people are likely to underachieve in academics and in life. I think a good book that Charles Murray does do to address that is Coming Apart. And I'd recommend reading that one as well. And probably the less to the bell curve and Coming Apart will give you a more complete picture of the kind of the problem that's are going on. And yeah, um, I think IQ does make a difference, but IQ is not enough in its own right, really, um, to solve things. And let's see. All right. Do you think the Department of Efficiency will have a negative impact on GDP? What are the short-term and long-term impacts on GDP growth? Uh, First of all, it depends. Do you consider government? It's on an accounting basis because government spending is accounted as part of GDP. Yeah, it would be negative from that perspective, but like it's not really as simple as number go up with GDP. Like I'm not going to be like Mr. What if alt hist and be like, oh, statistics are meaningless and that the GDP number going up doesn't mean improved quality of life, because it generally does. However, where I think you have to look at a deeper criticism with the numbers is that government spending is not necessarily productive. It's just taking from one person, the taxpayer, and giving it to a government program or a government workers. That's not creating wealth. That's just transferring it at best. And due to inefficiencies, it might actually be reducing overall productivity in society. And so, yeah, you will cutting government spending in a blanket will lower GDP, but in the aggregate, if that money is used put towards better uses or saved or invested or spent on things that actually generate growth, then it will be in the long run better. Again, a lot of these structural reforms are short-term pain for longer-term prosperity, and the Department of Government Efficiency is a prime example of this. Um, let's see. What is your biggest economic related takeaway from the 2024 election? Well, inflation is worse for people than unemployment, really, is the lesson. Like people's vote, like inflation is the one thing that will change people's voting patterns quicker than anything else. And if you want a stable democracy or stable society, you need to do whatever you can to prevent inflation from getting out of control. And this is what allowed the Reagan Revolution to happen, when Carter's bad policies led to, and Nixon's bad policies led to inflation. The old post-war Keynesian order kind of got destroyed, and the post like Clinton kind of political order of doing things kind of got destroyed through inflation from the Biden administration. So the main economic lesson here is that inflation is the biggest catalyst for regime change. And it's not just an American thing. You see it in other countries too. Like every country that's had an inflation problem in the West, I think all but one has had a political party change in the most recent election. So, yeah, that's your big take. If you want to be a successful society and you want your political faction to rule, you can't really, especially in a place where you have free and fair elections, you can't let inflation get out of control, and you need to acknowledge the importance of growing living standards. Um, can you elaborate more on why you don't believe in the efficient micro process and the five factor? I talked about this on the last live stream, uh, so you can watch that one if you want to know more about my thoughts on the efficient market hypothesis. But first of all, it's mainly large cap equities are the only index that consistently outperforms the active managers. If you look at other asset classes, it tells a very different story. Um, on top of that, you've got the the idea of like you wouldn't have a lot of these speculative booms and busts if the market was truly efficient. Like, was the value of Cisco in between 1999 and 2001 really that much different to create a parabola like all the other internet stocks? Was that really the true efficient value? No, it probably was not. Um, and there's also correlations with share impact of share buybacks that play roles on things such as this. But in general, and also Clifford Asness did a good paper about the future of market efficiency, which I might post in a comment. And he does a good job kind of summarizing a lot of this. But um, that's I mean, again, I've elaborated this several other times, so I want to move on to other questions. But thank you for asking, and thanks for becoming a member. And yeah, I'm going to mention the memberships now. I have memberships on this channel, and there's kind of like two tiers. Like the lower tiers, the perk is you get access to my videos like up to 24 hours earlier. So to like, I might even release it the next video I'm doing about the Great Wealth Transfer that's coming out on Sunday for the members right after I finish this live stream. And then for the higher tiers, the perks are for the $10 tier is you get access to my bonus content, which I'm not going to ever make less than at least one video a week free for you guys here. But sometimes I get in too far of a tangent that's not related to the video, but still interesting. And I'll make that a separate bonus video. And so that's kind of what I put in there. And then I'm eventually going to maybe do a conference in the future, but that's a whole nother topic. But that's the perks of memberships. So if you want to get my videos early or access to the bonus content, get a membership here or on my Substack or Patreon. Either way, any way you choose, you'll get access to all the bonus stuff. Next question. Have you made a video on post-labor economics? Do you think AI is... Yeah, I did. I did one about post-scarcity economics as part of the Iceberg of Economics series. And I did several videos about AI. I have a whole playlist called AI and Economics, and the post-scarcity one is in there. I recommend checking that out. Let's see. I watched a YouTube video speculating that Trump's hard line at the EU can motivate them to replace the dollar with the euro by allying with China, India. Thoughts? The dollar can only, I've mentioned this before, the only way the dollar is going to be replaced if somebody creates a harder currency. And a harder currency means it's got to be physically backed by something, whether it's gold or silver or real estate, because like switching to another fiat currency doesn't provide any additional gains. They're trying to do it despite the US, but there's not really any reason like why a uninterested, non-biased business transaction would be motivated to switch to the dollar. And also, given the relative health of the U.S. economy, the U.S. dollars has higher interest rates than the euro, and has consistently had higher interest rates to the euro since the Great Financial Crisis. So why would you also give up the interest income of having your money in dollars versus euro just so that you can protest geopolitics? I think the only way you get it is China creates a gold-backed currency or something similar, and China would need to increase its gold supply by at least 8x for that to be even in the possibility. Let's see. Okay, so people like my editing, so that's not really an issue. I've heard the Democratic Party compared to the Soviet Union at the end of the Soviet Union. Are there economic policies that are similar? I did a video about this, Matix. It's the one where I reacted to Neil Ferguson's Soviet America. So check that out. I go into that very topic in much more detail over 20 minutes. So yeah, if you haven't seen the Neil Ferguson comparison video, the reaction I did to Neil Ferguson's Soviet America, it's there. Let's see. I'm just scrolling down to see if there's... Any new question? There definitely is. I'm just any hope for Los Angeles? Yeah, I actually have a lot of hope for Los Angeles. You guys just elected Hawkman to be your DA, which you're going to get rid of Gascon, who just doesn't decide to enforce crimes. The state Proposition 36 passed, so if you steal under $950, it's actually an enforceable crime again. And yeah, and then you've seen several similar turnovers in places like San Francisco and Oakland for their mayors. And it just seems like California has collectively decided we're not going to put up with high crime anymore. And there's real political consequences to this. So, and then they also have the Olympics coming up. And the Olympics is kind of America is Los Angeles is going to become America's face to the world. And the leadership in LA, if they want to not be a global embarrassment, is going to have to clean up LA from a crime perspective and probably from like a sanitation perspective and a quality of infrastructure perspective to make sure the Olympics go smoothly and it shows this country properly on the right stage. So from like a public policy perspective, I'm actually very optimistic about Los Angeles. In terms of economy, I think the West Coast is at risk of becoming my generation's Rust Belt. Like instead of heavy manufacturing, it's tech and entertainment. And with AI and the mobility of those jobs and the uncompetitiveness of the California due to high real estate prices and bad government policy, a lot of people are moving out. You could see my video, San Francisco is the next Detroit. And like, I think the media and traditional media is going to be weakened through independent creators such as this channel and others. And that's not good for Los Angeles. Like from an economic perspective. And a lot of their old business, Southern California used to have a lot of headquarters, a lot of different kind of companies, you know, in Orange County and up in LA and other places. And most of those have moved to Dallas because of taxes. So unless if California reforms itself to be more competitive for businesses, we could have our own mini Rust Belt moment that that things struggle here until people said, I had enough. Like Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota historically were the most blue states in America for the mid 20th century. And they had the strongest unions, the most progressive politics, and they had some of the most successful economies too. But they kind of choked themselves out of being competitive, and people moved elsewhere, mainly to the South and the West. And then also internationally in the case of a lot of the factory jobs. And I think that what happened with heavy machinery manufacturing in the upper Midwest, which still has a lot of it there, but it's now done mostly by machines and it's been spread out more evenly distributed, not across the world, but across the country too. There's manufacturing plants all over America now. But you can see that I think that same risk is like California with technology and entertainment. It's going to get more broadly distributed across the country and the world. And that's going to come at the expense of employment and jobs in Southern California and Northern California. And you're having businesses leave just due to California's non-competitiveness. So I would say that, yeah, I think that is a potential downside risk, but the bright side of that is maybe housing might become more affordable. But I think California will reform its ways. It's a very cyclical state. It goes up and downs. And I think California will become a manufacturing hub in the future and has a lot of natural resource potential too. And new industries will come and fill the place of entertainment. But you might have a bumpy ride in between. But I'm long run optimistic about California. And I think that maybe this election might be the start of California becoming more politically competitive again, which is probably good for the country when the big swing states happen to also be the big states, because it means that our government has to be more accountable on no matter what your views on either side of the aisle. Any thoughts on East, South, Eastern Europe? Any insights? I think that Poland has done a fairly good job with its economy. I think its GDP per capita has caught up to UK and it's close to Germany's now. Czech Republic is generally has good policies. I don't really know too much about a lot of the other countries in Eastern Europe and the Balkans to really have a strong enough opinion that I don't sound uninformed. So I don't really want to dive too much deeper into that. Um, let's see. Let's see. Is the U.S. consumer an unstoppable force? As it sure seems like it. Well, I mean, the U.S. consumer's limit is really there's really three limits to the consumer. I did a whole video about the consumer back in July for those who are interested, and the first one was the first limit is income. Like incomes need to grow, especially adjusted for inflation. Like if like you need even if you have debt, you need income to service the debt. The second is access to credit. I think that interest rates have bottomed out for multiple generations back during like in the 2010s. And so I don't think you can boost um, consumption just through debt anymore. I think that those days are gone. And then the third one is drawing down from existing savings or inheritance, which the great wealth transfer is the video I'm going to be talking about is about that. You might get the next kick up in spending through inheritance across there's $96 trillion of people over 65 that needs to be transferred over the next 20 years to boomers and Gen Z. Not boomers, sorry, millennials and Gen Z. And so that could be the next kicker for the consumer. I think really what's the strength of America is not the consumer necessarily, but just we have the most productive companies in the world. And that's why corporate earnings keep going up. And we have a system that allows creative destruction and entrepreneurs to build new things. And we're the leaders in technology, and we keep when we have enough natural resources and food and energy to keep those costs low enough so that people have enough discretionary income to buy things else. I think the biggest risk is housing continuing to go up as a percentage of income and choking everything else. And we had a mini recession, even if the politicians didn't claim it to be, in the first half of 2022. And that was triggered when prices went too high relative to wages and people lost money to spend. And I think we're at risk of something similar now. Like the inflation rate has slowed down, but just because the rate of inflation doesn't slow down doesn't mean prices have fallen. Like the cumulative inflation is still way too high, and wages have not caught up to that. And that is going to what is the risk, I think, to the consumer is that their purchasing power just isn't enough to spend beyond necessities. And yeah, I think also the recent like surge of immigration over the last few years has also brought in a bunch of consumption, but which is makes the consumption numbers look bigger on an absolute basis, even if per capita consumption may not be up. And I think the statistic that you really need to look at if you want to measure real prosperity is per capita real GDP, not just absolute GDP, because that covers up population growth and inflation and other things like that. How do you balance your dating versus family versus your business as well as your video making? Well, the thing is that you kind of have creative cycles, or sometimes you're more productive in certain things than others. Um, like with videos, I don't record just one video a week and release them every week. I record usually 4 to 6 videos in a single sitting and then release them over a month. Because if I had to like have dedicate a certain amount of time every week to videos, I wouldn't have time to do everything else. And if I batch them up, it's a lot more productive that way. So if you see me wearing the same outfits, that's probably in videos back to back. That's probably why. Um, yeah. So, like that's partially what it is. And with my business, um, yeah, I've been putting a lot. I have a thing. I'm fortunate to have a really good team. Like I'm not the only person. I have a business partner and 3 other colleagues who have all really helped me grow the company, and dividing and conquering is helpful. Like I tried to start a business as a sole proprietor and doing it all myself, and it it ran me to the ground in terms of my physical health, and it just was too difficult because I don't have all the skills myself to build the company at the potential that I want it to realize. And so that and yeah, I mean, and then like Yeah, I mean, and then just in terms of dating, I usually restrict it to weekends, like, or have happy hours with my friends, like after, I don't know, from like 5 to 7 on weekdays if I'm going to hang out with them. Uh, but yeah, that's kind of, you got to have at least one day that you just don't do any work. And it's usually Sundays for me, but and then like the thing is, I have missed out a little bit on his vacations. I did do some this summer, but like when I company does scale to the size that I'd like, I maybe hopefully be able to do more of those. But yeah, I don't know. I the getting things done thing, back to the earlier question. I think that's how I manage it. I just have to be very intentional on how I plan my time, because it is a lot of work, to be quite honest. And I have no idea how many hours a week I work because I don't keep track of it. And it's very volatile. And then there's certain times where it's slow, like for example, around Christmas time, that I'll spend more time with my friends and family then, because there's just simply less work to do on the business side. Or maybe I'll make more YouTube videos then. So there's seasons for everything too, and you got to figure out where you're the most inspired to get things done. Sometimes it's your work stuff, and so you should just focus on that, because 1 hour of like being in the flow for a specific topic is worth 4 to 5 hours when you're just trying to grind at it and you just don't have the creative energy to do it. Hopefully that answers your question. Um, let's see. Uh, let's the student feel a channel content discussed definitely trend right wing. Yeah, I mean, I don't really try to make this show overtly political. I'm not going to ever be a Rush Limbaugh type figure ranting on raving on Rumble. Um, I think that like my politics may come out just because I talk about finance and markets, and that tends to have a capitalist bent. But it's not going to be an overly political channel. I'm not going to really be endorsing candidates or anything like that. Um, yeah, is the Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS Act chopped? What does that mean for future GDP growth to being affordable to the current deficit? Do you think the money was used wisely? I think most of the money I think the CHIPS Act could be potentially used wisely from a strategic point of view. I think the Inflation Reduction Act was mostly a government boondoggle and was not used very wisely. Uh, yeah. Can you tell us a bit about your professional career? Okay. I run a wealth management firm. What I do basically is I manage money for high net worth individuals or young people who are rapidly on their way to becoming high net worth individuals who have high savings rates. Unlike doomers on YouTube, uh, I actually want my audience to become more successful, because if you guys become more successful and your incomes go up and we have more prosperity in the world, you'll become my clients. So that's kind of, I know it's tongue in cheek, but it's also true. Like I actually want to see all of you guys succeed, and I have a vested business professionally in seeing all you guys succeed. And I like having my incentives lined up that way, for being an optimist. But yeah, I used to, most of my career, since I graduated from college, I've worked in finance, usually as an analyst or a portfolio manager at various hedge funds, in the West Coast and in Singapore. Um, and then after I left the hedge fund space, I started the wealth management firm, because a lot of people ask me questions like, "Hey Nick, what should I do with my money? The market's moving up and down, and like I not really sure what to do, and I got hit on my portfolio because of X, Y, and Z." And I got enough of these calls and emails that's like, look, I can help a lot more people and build a much larger business opportunity if I switched away from the institutional finance side to the more, um, private wealth management side of things. And my business partner happened to also want to leave the hedge fund space at the same time. And his expertise is the bond market, whereas mine is more the equity market and the stock market. And so we had a good synergies in that way. And we built our firm. And that's kind of what I do. I kind of bring like my knowledge in the capital markets, and my experience into on the private client level. But like again, there's no guarantees in superior returns. So like, yeah, that's not. I'm not trying to make any claims on that, but that's just a little background of what I do. Uh, let's see. What entity has more influence on inflation, the Federal Reserve or the executive legislative branches of government? Well, they both do. The Federal Reserve is what increases the money supply, and money supply is a driver of inflation. But Congress is the transmission pipe. So, like, if you say, for example, you print a bunch of money, and let's say you fill up like you have a bunch of the Fed is like the water spout, and they let a bunch of water in, but it goes into like some tank that's super big and never is going to fill up. Like it won't ever really affect everybody because it's stuck in the water tank. But if Congress hits breaks the tank open and the water tower floods into the whole city, then that's how it allows the inflation to transmit into the economy. So it kind of requires both. Congress, if with that it tries to pass a big spending budget without the liquidity of the Fed, you'll get ultra high. You won't get any funding. You'll have to either raise taxes or borrow a lot and at a high interest rate because there won't be enough liquidity to buy those bonds at a lower interest rate. Whereas the other way around, if the Fed prints a bunch of money, but there's fiscal austerity, the transmission mechanisms for that inflation to get out are not as effective. They still will get out. I think there was inflation much higher than what the numbers were in the 2010s, but it won't be as quick or as ferocious as it was during the pandemic when you got both rapid fiscal expansion and monetary expansion at the same time. Do you think natural disasters damage America's economy enough to stop GDP growth, say for 0%? It'd have to be a pretty bad natural disaster for that. America's so big, and a natural disaster hits a relatively small area that the country can adapt fairly quickly. If it was, say, like a very small country, say like the Netherlands, and they had a giant flood, which flooded the entire country, which is smaller than one state, then yeah, that would be severe. Natural disasters are bad for the economy. Anybody says it's not, it's falling for broken window fallacy. But again, given how big and how spread out our cities are, America is a lot more resilient to that. What do you think of the CFA exam? I think the CFA exam is a great way to have a financial education. I took all three and passed all three CFA exams myself, and I learned a lot from it. Yeah. So, and if you want to learn about finance, level one is a good way to get started. Level one is kind of like the equivalent of undergrad in finance. Level two is kind of the equivalent of a graduate degree in finance. And level three is kind of like real world applications of the concepts of level one and level two. Do you think the economy can be modeled by considering the actions of self-interested individuals in the aggregate? Could you model an increase in population's greed, for instance? I don't know if you could model a population's greed, but you can if you say you can use greed as like the variable, the X variable that you change, and you could probably have a function that says the economy will react a certain way if variable greed, let's just say G for greed in the algebraic equation, goes up or down. You might be able to do that, but I don't think you can necessarily quantify greed directly. I think it could be induced through algebraic logic, but I don't think you can it's kind of like velocity of money. The way velocity of money is measured is because it's induced through having all the other variables in the equation solved, and you solve for V. I think it'd be the same thing for this. Let's see. Are there any trends of wages rising? Additionally, do lower skill jobs tend to have wages catch up to inflation faster than higher skill jobs? Yeah, there's been wages that rose consistently during Trump's first term, and I think there's a good chance that they will again because there was a lot of restrictions in labor supply and economic stimulative policies that increased demand. And you've had wages increase in the 1990s. You've had real wages increase in the 50s and 60s. Until where inflation got too far out of hand, and even in the 80s too. So there's been plenty of times where you've had real wages increase. And during times of high inflation, lower wages do increase faster because one, a lot of social welfare payments are payment in kind, not cash, and they catch up. And two, people will not work below the cost of subsistence. And lower wages are usually essentially the cost of subsistence. And so lower wages have to come up to catch up with inflation. Otherwise, the workforce will just not participate. People aren't going to take a loss by working for long periods of time. Um, let's see. Um, yeah. Okay. So I'm saying I should do these QAs on up and write in the comments. How often do you think I should be doing live streams? Once a week, once a month, um, once every 3 months, or only when I hit benchmarks? Because I've gotten mixed responses on this. Some of you guys have said that I should do what's it called? That I should do none of these anymore, and others are saying I should do these all the time. And I noticed this one is a little bit quicker than the last one, and I got less pre-scripted questions as a result. So I want to make sure that I have enough questions to fill these up too. Otherwise, it's very hard for me to do a live stream. I'm just going to rant about random stuff. That's not really what I want to do with these. And yeah, before I get on, since I'm starting to hit the end of the line, but I know you probably have more questions if I think about it. I'm going to just update you on more other developments on the channel while I wait for you guys to write more questions. First, one thing I also want to do is I want to start bringing more guests on or becoming guests on other YouTubers' channels. Given that we've grown to a certain size, I think I could get more higher profile people to appear on Analyzing Finance with Nick and do more collabs. And I want to know if you guys have any suggestions on who I should do any sort of collaborations with and bring on the show. I've done some good ones with Damon Cassidy already. I've done some with Tony Greer. Um, and I've appeared on John Kurtz's show to talk about economics of sports ball. And I have and yeah, I have a few others in mind. Like you're probably gonna start seeing me on other podcasts pretty soon. So if you have suggestions on collaborations, I would love to hear those from you. Um, Also, if you have direct questions for me, especially as I talk about more investment type focused stuff, um, remember you always just contact me directly through my contact form on my website, nickpardini.com, or through email because I can't answer those types of things. Um, and now's the chance to get, because right now the channel is relatively small. I'm offering these consultations for free, but if it fills up, I might have to start charging for these things or restricting it to people who have more specific investment advice that's easier for me to answer. So if you want me to have the live consultations, probably now's your opportunity when we're still kind of in the early phase of offering them. Um, and yeah, and then also I'm gonna get back into more public speaking. So I did some videos I've showed where I've presented at events and things like that. And you'll probably see more videos of me speaking at other conferences. And if you need me at your conference, or feel free to reach out. But now with all of my plugs done, I'm gonna get back to your questions. The let's see, thoughts on specific industries growing in the U.S. or the prospect of growth. Um, yeah, there's a lot of industries that I think are going to be growing. I like biotech, particularly biotech that deals with longevity. I like the video game industry long term. I like alternative media such as YouTube long term. Um, I think industrial manufacturing is going to come back in a big way, and robotics, particularly robots that can replace uh, manual labor type jobs. That's going to be a big one. Driverless cars. There's a lot of things that are construction, particularly residential real estate construction. I think is going to be, at least until the next housing bust happens, be a really big opportunity opportunity and infrastructure development as well. So, and those are just some of them. There's like a lot of different um, industries. Um, yeah. And then, do you think finance and industry actually contributes to society? You're asking a finance guy. So, what answer do you think I am expected? I would say the best way to reach me is through the contact form on the website, is probably easier. You can also email me. I check both of them, but the contact form allows you to separate your responses by category. But yeah, when it comes to finance plays a critical role in a free market economy. What finance does, and it's the bridge between capital um, and those who can put best to use. So, say for example, you're a wealthy old money guy who has a bunch of money, but you do not. You're older. You want to kick back, and you don't really have the time or the willingness to put in the work to start a business. You've already started, you already made your money. You want to just relax. Um, However, you feel like you could still put that money. The thing is, but however, there are younger people who need that money to build businesses or to buy a house or whatever. And so what what financial industry does is it allows people to be compensated who have the capital to provide it to the people who can put it to best use and maximize the return on it. A classic example would be um, a saver putting money in the bank and the bank lending money to a small business owner. The small business owner is going to get a higher return than the interest rate, and therefore the economy grows on the net. And if it wasn't for the bank, there wouldn't be any way to facilitate it. I mean, I guess the small business owner could go to the saver's house and find them, but that's not very efficient, and he may not have the social connections or even the knowledge of where to find this person. And for bigger projects, like maybe a small business, one individual could do the loan. But let's say you're doing a massive infrastructure project. Say you want to build an LNG terminal in Virginia, and LNG terminals cost billions of dollars to build. There may not be just one guy who can finance that. You would need a capital market to issue bonds, and they divide the loans because that's probably even too big for a single bank to finance it. So you have a investment bank um, raise the money by splitting that loan into several different securities that each will pay. Like you could buy for like $1,000 or $10,000 each, and they'll each pay an interest rate, the same interest rate, and the interest will be the proportion of the total amount of money borrowed by the company. And so that's what the bond market is. You have tons of investors all over the world buying a piece of that debt that the company took on to build the LNG terminal. And that's what finance does. It allows money to be coordinated and deployed where it's put best to use. And then insurance is also another part of finance, which protects certain downside by pooling the risk. So, like, insurance company could not be successful if it only insured one house in Florida, or even if it was 30 houses, but they're all in the same neighborhood in Florida. But to make up for the losses, say, for example, of a hurricane hitting those 30 houses in Florida, the same insurance company has people paying premiums for thousands of houses all over the rest of the country. And so that pooling of risk allows the cost of protecting risk to be a lot lower. And that's another example of how the financial industry helps reallocate capital from where it is currently now to its best use. And also finance also financial industry also just manages risk and allows people to do certain things at a lower cost than they would without the existing of the financial system. Um, Hopefully that answers your question on finance being a productive role. Do you think Detroit might make a comeback? 2024 is the first year population. It already is making a comeback. You have people like Dan Gilbert and others who have heavily reinvested in the city. I've never been to Detroit, so um, but the housing costs have bottomed out there. It's very cheap. They has like a history of having manufacturing and all the like if you were going to onshore, it's not a bad place to do it. They have plenty of water. That's the advantage of the upper Midwest too. A lot of places are water scarce, just as the Southwest of the US, whereas the Midwest has the Great Lakes. So it's plenty of fresh water. It's got plenty of space. It has low cost of living, so you can hire people at lower wages there. And you have the space to build massive factories. And a lot of the forces that are hollowing it out are starting to reverse. And the politics of Michigan and these other Rust Belt states have become more business friendly and more competitive. So as a result, it's not as hostile to set up a company there. So I think Detroit kind of bottomed out when it went bankrupt, I think, in the wake of the '08 crisis and the early 2010s. And I think it's been on an upward trajectory since. So, yeah, I think Detroit is in good shape for the future. I don't know if I live there personally because I don't like cold weather, but my personal preferences really have nothing to do with the future of Detroit. Um, as long as relations between men and women are on the downside, video games and other virtual entertainment will be good business. I think that it's more just the one thing I'm really worried about for the video game bet is if men's wages start to increase relative to women's again, video games are going to be hurt pretty hard because video game stocks and video games are an indirect bet on men's wages falling relative to women. Um, and that was the kind of the big driver for it because if you can't afford to do anything else, you game. It's the cheapest amount of entertainment per dollar by far, more than movies, more than anything else. And so if people get more prosperous, they might switch to dating or playing golf over video games. So that's the bear case. You just pointed it out. Um, let's see. If one's ambitious, competitive, possibly employed a large company beyond 70 to 75. Um, Well, there's ageism in the corporate workforce. And if you're, say, in your 50s or above, you are higher cost because you have children and a family and you can't work for a low wage even if you wanted to. And you have enough work experience that you think you can command a higher wage if you find the right fit, but sometimes it's harder to. So as a result, if you're going to if I'm a company laying people off, the target will be those older workers and that's ageism and it's not right, but that's kind of just the nature of the beast. And the ageism is really bad in Wall Street and tech. But you can still be a productive employed person at that age, but you probably be more likely to do it as a self-employed person. Like my father's a good example. He's 70 years old. He owns his own company. He has no intention to retire soon. He could just ramp up or ramp down his business based on how many clients he wants to take on. And if he wants to relax on a more retired lifestyle, he can reduce the amount of people he's working with or vice versa. And that's really, if you want to keep working in a traditional retirement age, you need to have that kind of flexibility because your health may be more limited or you have other family obligations. Maybe you want to be around your grandkids more. So that's really how that would be. Yeah, that's let me answer that question. Are we experiencing an oligarchy with rich buying elections? No. I don't. You should watch my video I did last week about campaign finance and why Democrats consistently outraise Republicans. The rich we have the rich people in this country cancel each other out. If you look at donations from PACs and or people with more than $5,000 in donors, it's even on a partisan split. So the ultra rich are effectively canceling. For every Elon Musk, there's a Soros. So no, I actually don't think that's the case. The bigger driver for the donations has been small donors. Small donors donate to Democrats versus Republicans at a ratio of 3-1. And the reason is, I think, I'm not going to spoil the video, but it's just different priorities. People on the left who care more about donating to their politicians than people on the right. And you can guess the reasons why, or you can watch my video. Um, any ideas on the macroeconomic consequences for Mexico after Trump's victory? I mean, I think that it depends really on how this immigration thing is handled. Like a lot, if there are going to be deportations, you're going to have a lot more migrants in Mexico, even if it's just a temporary passage to wherever they originally came from, or people from Mexico coming back. But there's that element. I think that if you really want to stop the immigration problem long run, you need to make Mexico more prosperous. And I'm going to be doing an update on the economic future of Mexico. I have a great guest um, that I'm going to bring to discuss this, who has more of an inside perspective on Mexico. And I will go into a lot of this. But the thing is that I think really that if the Trump administration was smart, they need to help work with Mexico to make Mexico a better place to do business. And with thanks to NAFTA um, and Mexico's strategic really like alliance effectively with the U.S., onshoring some of the stuff that's just not doesn't make financial sense. It doesn't make certain things are just too low skilled, but not simple enough for robots to do. Those jobs shouldn't be coming back to America, but they could come to Mexico, and that would be a higher paying job than a lot of the abject poverty that is in Mexico. But at the same time, it also is part of our trade infrastructure, and the closer proximity to the United States saves on transportation, energy costs, and there's a lot of other benefits to it. And geopolitically stabilizing our neighbor to the south and raising incomes there is better for everybody on this continent. And Mexico, for a lot of people, think it's a poor country, but it's not even really that poor of a country. It's the median GDP per capita in Mexico is higher than 2/3 of countries in the world. And Mexico is technically an OECD country. So it's not like Mexico is actually one of the countries I'm the most bullish on long term, despite maybe some of the issues in terms of their leadership and the ideology of its leadership. But the raw economic fundamentals are actually very good for Mexico. Um, why don't more Americans call their oligarchs oligarchs? Well, I think the main thing is that to that question is a lot of these quote unquote oligarchs are newer money. So, like when I think of oligarch traditionally, I think of like old money, aristocratic families who've basically bought and controlled the government for multiple generations. And we haven't really seen that many multi-generational oligarch-like behavior. And also a lot of these businesses too were made legitimately. It wasn't like the Russian oligarchs where they used like mafia style tactics to acquire effective monopolies and do deals with the government to make their wealth in a way that would be considered criminal in this country. So I think that has to do with it. It's the nature of the money that's made and the fact that it's relatively new money is why America is not an oligarchy. Um, yeah. Have you heard of Ben Felix's YouTube channel and the Rational Reminder podcast? I know the name, but I can't match it to anything off the top of my head. And I've never heard of the Rational Reminder podcast. Thanks for the idea. Let's see. Any thoughts on India growing as a world power? I think I might do eventually an economic futures video about India. I haven't done it yet. And now that I'm out of it, I mean, I'm going to eventually run out of old money stuff to do. Like I'm not going to become the old money channel. Like there's a few ideas I have left in that range, but it'll probably go down to once I finish all the ones that I have for this series, like now, it'll probably go down to maybe once every 3 months I do something old money related, realistically, maybe a little bit more. So like if I was going to go back to one of my different series on YouTube, which one would you like to see? Like, would you want me to do more economic futures for various countries or US states? Do you want me to do just more general macroeconomic commentary or stuff about why why certain economic things drive social behaviors, or more expert guests, or like bring back the dunking the doomer. Like, let me know your thoughts on other series because yeah, I don't want to become just the old money channel, even though that has been what's allowed the explosion of growth on this channel. Uh, yeah, let's see. But India has a main problem though in the fact that it it might not grow to first world status before automation comes in and takes out the ladder. Like there's a real risk with all these emerging market countries of the I call it the automation and robotic ladder pull. Like how a lot of the early Asian countries and got up the development ladder was doing manufacturing and moving up the ranks until they were able to provide service economies and other higher skilled jobs. And and having that abundance of young people is great for to fill those if the jobs are there. But if automation and AI and robotics remove the demand for those jobs, now you have a bunch of young people, particularly highly educated young people, but with no job to do. And that's the worst demographic scenario you can have. So it's really, can India move up fast enough before technology displaces the bottom and the ladder pull is pulled? Can they get on the ladder before it gets pulled? That's really the question for India. And it's a tough one, honestly. Like in the short term, fundamentals for India are great. Like they have their economy is growing, they're expanding a lot of in terms of manufacturing, their economic policy is improved. But the question really is that will it be too little, too late in the long run? It's really India is racing against AI and robots. Um, yeah. Um, let's see. Um, do you believe the Trump admin can get the deficit and national debt interest payment spiral under control? If so, how? It's going to be very difficult for them to do that. I would love it for them to do that. It depends, like, how serious are they about the Department of Government Efficiency? The problem is most of the spending is in entitlements, in Social Security and Medicare and defense. Um, and I don't really think this is going to sound like I'm coming on the left, but there's no way to balance the budget without cutting defense. Like, and there's no way of balancing the budget without cutting entitlements. You're going to have to reform Social Security and Medicare to raise the age, raise the taxes, or cut the payouts. A combination of those three on each of the major entitlements, and maybe the defense budget. The cutting can be through to cover Department of Government Efficiency, just getting rid of the fat. I don't know enough about the inner workings of the defense budget of the U.S. to really say how much fat there is really to cut versus real strategic losses. Maybe part of that cut will just be getting rid of all the foreign bases or just reducing a lot of them to save costs. Or in a world where it's more unmanned and robotics, maybe we don't need as big of a standing army. So they're going to you're actually have to cut at some third rails, which is defense, Social Security, Medicare, if you really want to fix the deficit long term. And Reagan tried and failed at it. So it makes me a little bit hesitant to see if Trump can do, especially since he never ran on doing such a thing. Like he beat down the Paul Ryan division of the party by promising not to cut entitlements in 2016. And he's then not mentioned really any of it in this campaign either. So, it's and yeah, you're right. It's not but the thing is that President Trump does have Congress behind him. However, there is the nature of Congress and their unwillingness to cut spending because it hurts their reelection chances. So can um will Congress include the suggestions of the Department of Government Efficiency or not? Will they approve it? That's not a sure thing. And that's a valid concern, Ralph. Yeah. Let's see. Do you see an increase in affordable housing now that rates are going down? Should boost house supplies. Let's see. Um, yeah. Let's. I think that lowering interest rates will not improve housing affordability because if you cut rates without fixing the supply balance, all that is going to do is that money that's available, people are just going to bid up higher prices for the house. So any gains from savings from rates going down will be canceled out by a higher housing price, all things equal. So cutting rates isn't enough to answer your question. Are there economic principles that were absolutely applicable 3 decades ago, but modernity has rendered them false? Um, I mean, there's the idea "The End of History" by Francis Fukuyama, that basically the liberal international order was going to just be the way things were with no challengers, and the rise of China has proven otherwise. So that's an example. Some people legitimately believe that communism was viable, and that failed. Or a lot of the Keynesian stuff, what that was treated as gospel, got challenged with like stagflation is a good example. Like people thought you could never have high inflation and high unemployment prior to the 1970s. And then when the 70s happened, people realized that, yeah, stagflation is actually a possible thing. That's the most notable example of something of an economic law, which is like the Phillips curve, which is something that people thought was just always going to hold, that inflation and unemployment are always invertedly correlated, which that's not true. Uh, and so that's probably the most notable example. There are probably other ones, but that's the one that comes off the top of my head. How would a China-Taiwan war affect the economy? It wouldn't be very good. It would disrupt global trade, and yeah, it would probably lead to a major World War III type conflict, which I don't. That's why I don't think it will happen. Uh, are you familiar with Jevons paradox? What are your thoughts on it? I remember studying Jevons when I was doing international monetary economics back in college, but let me just reread it, just the Wikipedia summary quickly on this stream. Jevons paradox occurs when the technological progress increases the efficiency with the resource used. Well, the falling cost induces increase in demand enough that the resource use is increased rather than reduced. Yeah, it's real up to a point, but there's kind of basically the history of energy production. Um, but like, whereas like we burn the same amount of wood today as we did in like 1790, but the economy is so much bigger that that's a tiny percentage. That was all the energy consumption back then, but now it's a tiny percentage. And that's generally how these things work. Like energy usage, with the exception of coal, doesn't really go down that much from a source. It's just that the other uses fill the new demand. I think that's what's going to happen with, and I think that kind of, I think Jevons paradox is real to a degree until there's something even more disruptive that just makes using um, that resource completely obsolete. Example would be like whale oil versus kerosene. Um, like whale oil got cheaper with like whalers getting better at their job and harpooning technology and all that. But then once kerosene was discovered and was way more abundant than whale oil, people stopped whaling, and that's why we still have whales on this planet, thank God. So yeah, so I think it works up to a point. Um, what do you think? What would the Martian economy for 1 million people look like? Are you willing to do a video on this? Um, yeah, I mean, just look at, it'd be like a colonial economy. Like, look at Jamestown in 1605, or like Plymouth Rock. That would be like the closest historical example. Um, yeah, I mean, people wouldn't try to colonize it unless if there's a way to partially terraform it. And yeah, and by the time, like the distance, like to get there, based on what I've read, is probably like 6 months. Maybe it'll improve and make it down to like 4 months. And that'd be like similar to like the distance it took like for ships to sail from Europe to pre-colonial America. And just look at the how those economies worked, like 1600s, like North and South America, um, especially the places that didn't have like a existing civilization, like the Aztecs or the Incas. So like that might be that would be your base. It has to be a lot more based on self sufficiency and not really being able to expect the metropole back on Earth to respond quickly to any issues that you may have. Uh, Their one less risk is there's probably no life on Mars, so you don't really have to deal with like rivals from other native rivals causing issues or wild animals or things like that. But then also because there's no life, there's no domestic source of food, so you would have to you'd be fully reliant on food imports. But yeah, it's a good topic. I don't know if I have enough on it to make a whole video on it. Thoughts on solar energy? I think solar energy should be used where it makes financial sense without government subsidies, and where it doesn't make financial sense without government subsidies, they should stop using it. I think there's a lot of potential empty desert in the southwest of the U.S. that can be converted into solar energy. If we had better battery technology and transmission technology, then we might be able to use our whole power supply for solar. But and it's going to continue to grow, and I think it's getting to the point that it can grow without government protections. But it's not. It's we're a long way. It can't be our sole source of power. Have I read The Managerial Revolution? I've heard of it, but no, I have not read The Managerial Revolution yet. Um, are you optimistic about nuclear? Yes, I am optimistic about nuclear. Um, there's just been so much paranoia because of things like Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and Fukushima. Like, if you really want a clean energy and you want to be less dependent on fossil fuels, whether for environmental reasons or geopolitical reasons, you can't have a clean energy policy without nuclear, especially with all the energy demands that AI and LLMs and all this technology has. How you can't have that without nuclear. That's why a lot of these big tech companies like Microsoft want to build their own nuclear power plants for personal use for their server farms. If you want clean energy, that is that's the future. You need to have nuclear power. So yeah, I'm very optimistic on nuclear power. Do you believe in a cyclical history rather than a linear progression? I think it's more like a stock chart. Like, have you seen like these stock charts that goes like I guess it's inverted, but like it goes up and down. Like you have like a run up, then you have your pullback, and then you have another run up again to a new high, and then another correction or a bear market. Like there is ups and downs, but on the net, we have seen net progress, especially if you have the right variables in your civilization. The reason why you don't have progress, it's like same with an economy. When an economy stops growing, is because you have some issue in your culture that stagnates it. Uh, this is why certain civilizations have outperformed others, because certain ones are better at adapting to changing environments and disruptive technologies, and others are more resistant and they refuse to adapt and they will turn inward and stop growing and stagnate until forces outside force them to. So, like, yeah, creative destruction is real and it is the driver of longer term growth. And if society refuses to embrace it, then the thing is, not every change is good, though. There are a lot of changes that are bad. And if you take the wrong kind of changes, that's what causes those downtrends in the society of the realm of progress. And you go back to what used to work and then things go back up again. So it's not just, so I don't really believe in the Whig/liberal view of history that whatever progressive wanted is always the right way and that things are naturally better and it's human selfishness that prevents that. No, it's more that some new ideas work, some new ideas do not. And yeah, like And figuring out the right combination of those is what allows society to advance. If the world's population decreases to like 80 million is the population of Germany now. Um, I just don't really see a world that population would get that low short of like a alien invasion or nuclear war or some disease that kills young people disproportionately. Um, that is so like, but if you had a major decline in population, um, you would have certain things would not. I think you would have a lot of the same industries just in a smaller scale. Like, how does Germany run its country? That like everything, like most of the things that America has, Germany has. It's just they just have less amount of it because there's less people that they need to serve. I don't really think population size inherently gets rid of industries. It would make media companies a lot less valuable though, or um, and like I think companies, if they knew there was a smaller population size or a shrinking population, they would prioritize profitability over growth and being more efficient with what they have. Um, Thoughts on the current post-secondary education system? What country? America? Worldwide? I mean, I'm generally pro everybody getting bachelor's degrees still. Like a lot of the right wing anti college propaganda and everybody should work a trade, I think is quite frankly ridiculous. I think there are some people who think that's a good idea. Like for them, like some people are more inclined to work with their hands or don't really want to pursue a field that requires academic study. But to make that a broad basis suggestion for people is wrong. But at the same time, not everybody should go to college. I think you should have access for more people to go to college, and you can use a lot of supply side solutions. I did a whole series about this on student loans and finance. Just search my education and the Ivy League videos in that playlist. I have a whole playlist about college and economics. So there are ways you can change the incentives in the free market to reduce the cost of college to make it more accessible. And you should provide more opportunities to elite institutions. I mentioned before in this chat. But I think that um, people should get bachelor's degrees. And however, I think the value of graduate school, unless if you need a specific skill that is required to be learned in that graduate program, like being a doctor, for example, is a waste of time and money and debt. I'm generally against master's degrees and above. Um, and I think a lot of stuff that people learn on the master's degree and above level should be undergrad majors. Like I know, and my English listeners, if I'm wrong about this, please correct me. But based on my knowledge of how being a lawyer works in other countries like England, a law degree is a undergraduate degree. Why do we in America have to go to 4 years of studying some random subject and then 3 years of law school? Why can't you just do law school from 18 to 22 as part of your bachelor's degree? I haven't really, and just take the bar exam when you graduate from undergrad. Like they do that with CPAs, they do that with CFA and finance people. Why can't and medical school? Maybe it takes more time to become a doctor, but why can't like medical school take 2 years and you do the first 2 years as part of your pre-med degree, then having to do another 4 years and residency? Like I just think it's very inefficient. And a lot of these professional degrees should be consolidated in smaller amounts of time. And even bachelor degrees maybe should be 3 years instead of 4 years. Yeah, if you want to weed people out, just make the bar exam harder or the equivalent for other professions. Uh, yeah, I think the AMA intentionally tries to restrict the supply of doctors. That's why it's too hard to get into medical school. And I talked about that on one of Damon's videos that I did with him. And I don't really like artificial scarcity for professions. Like if there's a natural scarcity um, due to just people not being up to the task, that's fine. But or just people not having the aptitude to do it. But I don't creating artificial scarcity just to increase wages is generally something um, that in terms of like professional degrees and things, I'm against. Um, but yeah, why everybody should get a bachelor's degree? Because a few reasons. One, most people are not emotionally mature enough in a modern society to be functioning adults at 18 years old. I know this is going to sound a little patronizing. I know when I was 18 years old, I was not ready to start a business or work at some major corporation. It needs to be like a transition period. And college is kind of a good way for that, both in terms of socialization and for having a more professional, specialized education. Like up to the high school level, it's kind of just general knowledge. And then in college is when you start to learn more specialized knowledge for what you're going to do in the real world. Um, and that is, I also think that the value of university is to figure out what you want to do with your life professionally. Like if you're not spending hard time contemplating while you're in college what you plan on doing with your life when you get out of college, you don't even know basically everything you want to do, say between 22 and 62. But you should have an idea at least what the first few steps might be, or what the first path you might want to try. And if that doesn't work out, what the second path might be. And if you don't, you're wasting your time. Like people go to college just to party and study some easy major is not really worthwhile. Like the whole point, people need that time to figure out what they want to do with their life instead of aimlessly bouncing from job to job. And I think college provides a good platform with it. And I also think it's the socialization thing too. People need to have like some transition between living with their parents and being a completely independent adult. I might have an elitist view on this, but that's kind of my view on why people I think need bachelor's degrees. And also just the world's more advanced than it was like in the 50s when nobody went to college, like due to technology and more research and development on a variety of fields. Like in 1840, John Stuart Mill literally could read everything in the world and literally know every piece of written knowledge. Today, that's impossible. And so you just need more education, just simply on that basis too. So yeah, those are my reasons for why people should get bachelor's degrees. Do you think ambition has declined in America since the mid 20th century? Yes, but I think the ambition didn't start to decline until I think it's continued until 2000. I think the decline in ambition is a 21st century phenomenon. There's plenty of ambition in the 20th century. What changed the tech bust and people realized that there's a generation who's going to have it easier than them to get started, and that was demotivating. The government started to grow as a greater percentage of the economy in the West, and provided too high of a floor in terms of like, and the culture, such as being people more accepting of people living with their parents, and more generous safety nets also provide a higher standard of living floor. And then 2008 happened, which discouraged a lot of millennials from entrepreneurial things and ambitions. And you had less antitrust enforcement. There's just a lot of variety of variables that just changed the correlation between hard work and success. As the camera's inverted, so I have to do it like this. It used to be that people believe like this. Now it's kind of more like this. It's still positive, but less positive. And so that perception gap is causing ambition to lower. And it's always in the case in Europe. Like I used to read stories like in the Wall Street Journal where the valedictorians of like Greek and Italian, Spanish high schools want to be government workers. And I'd be like, what planet are they on? Like, why would somebody work so hard to be like the best of the best in terms of academics and to use that talent simply just to be a bureaucrat? Like, but now you're starting to see that kind of mentality be exported to our side of the Atlantic, which I'm not really big fan of, to be quite honest. So yeah, I do think that ambition is declining since about the year 2000, and hopefully we can rejigger the incentives in our society to turn that around. Um, do you see AI hurting the economy in any way other than job loss and weaponry? State leads to governments relying on hallucinating info. Yeah, that's a risk. That's why it really hasn't fully been able to replace white collar, because the hallucination problem is going to take longer than people think. And in fact, maybe the humanoid robots get faster at replacing blue collar worker before AI hallucinations are fully ironed out. But that's a real problem. But I think I think AI is a net positive for the economy but it is disruptive in terms of employment. That's the main risk, really, for AI. Who do you think the richest man in the world is? If I had to guess, it's Vladimir Putin because he made a deal with all the oligarchs that they got to stay oligarchs as long as he informally owned half of their businesses. So, yeah, uh, outside. So, and it's probably outside of him, other heads of state that have been authoritarian leaders. I think Erdogan is probably up there, um, and a few of these other ones. Those are probably the actual richest people on the earth. Um, there might be some old money families in Europe, like the ones who own like most of the real estate in London, but that data is not published. So I really no idea how much these people have money. So yeah, that's my guess on who it's oligarchs, dictators in authoritarian countries are the richest people in the world. Um, like, yeah, someone said that college degrees are yesterday's news, the elite path, because they're no longer scarce. Would you agree with this viewpoint? Yeah, I would. Like the idea that college guarantees you a middle class or upper middle class lifestyle is outdated. And that's why you're seeing the voting patterns for college educated voters shifting to the left. It's not because college professors are more successful in indoctrinating students or anything like that. It's because the type of person who's going to college is not the same type of person who went to college 10, 20, 30 years ago. It's more democratized. So as a result, it's more people from different social class backgrounds going to college. And so now you have a generation of precariats, people with college educations, but not the income associated with it. And so the result being is I'm doing a whole video about this called the precariat class and genteel poverty. And as part of my old money series. So I'm not going to get too much into it, but that's the answer to that question. Um, is creating AI inevitable because human nature is to create ever more technology, even if it means our own demise? Um, yeah, it's not necessarily human nature to create technology, but it's more the competitive forces that are going to drive it. Like Italy tried to ban ChatGPT when it first came out, and when they realized they started to really fall behind the rest of the world in terms of AI technology adoption, and they were gonna like become like a backward country very quickly because of it. That they put an end to that fairly quickly and reversed the ban. So the problem really with is that if you don't embrace this is why certain civilizations have stagnated in history and societies is because if you don't embrace the technology, your rival will, and they will beat you and conquer you, or you will fall into irrelevancy. And same in the business world. If a lot of businesses adopt new innovations in their industry and you don't, you're going to get out competed and be out of business or bought by one of your rivals. So yeah, that's what's driving it. Um, oh, it's younger and smaller generation spending more time in school, shrinking labor supply. Why are not wages increasing? Immigration. That's why. Uh, and wages have been increasing. They were increasing from 2016 to 2021. And so the thing is that if you immigration is the main thing that would prevent wages from going down in that scenario. Um, what career path do you think would be ideal to develop the skills, give you the best chance of being a successful entrepreneur in the future? Well, um, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you first need to figure out you need three things. One, you need to figure out what you can do better than 90% of people. Two, what you actually like to do, because if you don't have a boss and the threat of getting fired, you need to be able to be self-motivated to get up on a Monday morning. And three, you need to figure out what people actually need. Like when people ask you for help, what do they ask you for help for? That's probably a good start. Um, and like the way you get that kind of knowledge is you need to have 3 to 5 years of experience doing corporate in the field that you want to start a business in. Um, yeah, I mean, like, and you can't just chase whatever tech fad or whatever. It could work for some people, but it needs to be something that you actually have the knowledge and the interest in yourself. Otherwise, you're going to flame out. So you got to find something that hits that Venn diagram of those three variables I mentioned before, and then be in there and fill and solve the solution. Um, let's see. Do I have any more questions? Um, I, how would you describe Americans' ruling class? Watch my video about the American social hierarchy. It's the dual pyramid. You have the elite and the counter elite, and they pit the other classes against each other to fight their battles for institutional control. Uh, let's either. Have you heard of elite overproduction and Peter Turchin's ideas? Yes, I have. Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's some reality to it. I don't think you can have a quantifiable model though that will say like, oh, if you have this amount of elite overproduction, society is going to have a war and collapse. But yeah, I had the whole like scramble to get into the most prestigious colleges that happened when I was in high school and college was really a kind of a byproduct of elite overproduction. It's real. Um, I haven't read his full book, so I can't really go too much deeper into it. But yeah, the other thing is I want to ask the audience is what are you guys' thoughts on reaction videos? I did a lot of them earlier to like because I just found some people who just had logic that didn't make any sense from an economics point of view, or I thought I could add to the conversation. But now that this channel's a certain size and people will watch my original content, I think I'm gonna drop doing reaction videos unless if it's something that really hits a nerve for me personally. Did you like those, or do you guys prefer the original content? I personally prefer the original content, uh, but that's me. If Trump is a populist, why would these billionaires, oligarchs, and members of the coastal technocrat elites whose ideology inherently oppositional to Trump's populism? Is his populism fake? Um, it depends on what issues. Like you can be populist on certain issues and not populist on others. Populism, really, a simple definition is stuff that um, that people want, like the people that the common people want more than the elites do, for various reasons, or it's stuff that is responding to short-term problems that the people are now. And like there are certain issues you can be populist on and others you can't. Like for example, a lot of these coastal elites, especially like where I live, tend to be very against illegal immigration, which is a populist position. But there are rational reasons why somebody who is in the elites would oppose illegal immigration in terms of like social stability and um they're just and the health of the society otherwise. So that's where somebody might have a populist view on immigration, may not have a populist view on trade. They might be somebody who is more free trade. Like I'd probably put myself in that category. Like I'm somebody who's more populist when it comes to immigration personally, but more, um, I guess for lack of a better term, coastal elite on my views on trade. Uh, and then there's people probably have the opposite views. They're very pro tariff, but they're probably open borders as well. So you can have um, that. How effective are populist economic policies? I think for the most part, um, they're it depends on the policy. Like I would say universal health care and anti-illegal immigration and tariffs are all populist policies, but they're very different policies. So um, that is that's my take on it. And generally, I think populist policies tend to be short-sighted for the most part on economics. And sometimes the things are bad enough that you need a short-sighted policy because there may not be a long term if you don't have the short-term policy. But on the other hand, some populist policies are just bad, and there's certain consistent biases and errors that voters have that determine their views on economic populism. Like Latin America, as an example, is a region that has embraced economic populism to its detriment. And like, if by that definition of redistributionist policies as economic populism, then yeah, it's generally bad. I'd probably have most of my economic views are probably not very populist personally, but there are some exceptions. And when things get too out of hand, sometimes the populists are a check and saying, "Hey, look, you're missing something here." When it comes to the elite policymakers, maybe too insulated in their own communities to realize what the real negative side effects on some of these policies that look good on paper or on the aggregate level, but deep down actually cause negative unintended side effects. So it's a mixed bag. Um, do you think there'll be a civil war in America in the future? Absolutely not. And this recent election result um, confirms it. I saw What If Alt Hist's reaction to the election. He still thinks that there's this whole civil war coming, and the catalyst really for that would be just one side believing that they don't have a legitimate democratic means to making change. And the fact that we saw the Republicans win the popular vote is going to give confidence to the right that they can actually win a free and fair election. And that confidence will last at least 8 to 10 years and probably longer. Uh, so, yeah, I think that I think the Civil War odds maybe before this election 5% down to less than one. Um, and yeah, I I mean, I funny because What If Alt Hist was the person who this channel originally gained traction when I criticized his video that we were going to have a Great Depression in 3 years in August of 21. We're in November 2024 and we're nowhere close to that. I think he has some good content, particularly his History 102. I like that one, but his main channel has gotten a little bit, I would say, unhinged some to a certain degree. Thoughts on climate change? Watch my debunking the doomer on climate change. I went into it there. Manny asks, along the lines of elite overproduction, is the market for high-end services oversaturated? Wealth management industry, luxury brands, etc. I think that to a certain degree, we're at risk of that. The wealth management industry has been consolidating to as rapidly, and I think you will see more consolidation in a lot of luxury brands. But I don't think the wealth management industry, in particular, because there's more and more people becoming wealthy around the world, and whereas as long as society gets more prosperous, there will always be a need for wealth management. Even middle class people or upper middle class people hire wealth management people. It's not only like the uber elites. Like the things that could get saturated are things like private jets or people buying second homes in certain places, especially as population goes down, or high end jewelry or things like that. Um, and That's where I think you could see some saturation. Um, but that's a good question though, Manny. Thanks for asking because I think that there is a risk of oversaturation, especially as if Trump rebalances the economy to allow more advancement of the middle class at the expense of the elite, then there's going to be a shortage of things that are for middle class, particularly middle class families. Like there's not enough businesses that really service the interests of like a family of four who makes like, I don't know, 100 to 150K a year in a mid-sized city. Like every product out there is either the very high end or the cheapest of the cheap. And that's I think there's actually a shortage for people according to the middle. Um, let's see. Do you think there will be let's see. Also, what are your thoughts on the election? I'm actually very happy about the results of the election personally. Um, I don't try to go into my politics here too much, but I think that we needed to have. I think it's very important that Trump won the popular vote for the sake of social confidence and social trust. The immigration thing was getting out of hand and needed to be dealt with. Here in California, we passed a lot of anti-crime related ballot initiatives and elected district attorneys and got rid of people who were loose on crime. So that's great news too. You're seeing a lot of you're seeing also just the chance that we can have like build an economy based off of like real development versus just trying to entrench an inefficient bureaucracy that's time is long gone. But in general, I'm optimistic. I think this is going to be good for the economy. I think it's going to be good for social stability. These results and the fact it happened quickly and happened orderly is makes it important too. Um, yeah. Um, let's see if how do you think of the cultural revolution that began in the early 2010s will end if there's no civil war? How will this cultural change be resolved? Um, Wokeism is already declining. It peaked with George Floyd in 2020. Um, it's the same thing with like other social trends like atheism. Even if the numbers show that the nuns are rising in census data, like the trend of like atheism replacing religion peaked in like 2009. It just takes a while for people to notice it because people aren't really paying attention. People only pay attention to things when they get more trends, when they get more extreme, not when they mellow out. They just notice when you notice that, you'll start to see that a lot of things that you were worrying about 5 years ago are not as bad as they used to be. And I think woke is. I think the thing is that with wokeism is that ESG invest. You have a bear markets in the economy will make ESG viable because it's easy to have an ESG investment philosophy and be woke with your financial decisions. If no matter what you buy, it goes up. But if you have more dispersion or a bear market, you have to be more diligent in your investment decisions and actually have to pick things that will get real returns versus hype and fantasy or investing on your values. So that's how it works out in the financial world. Economic recession and market corrections fix a lot of this stuff. You don't need a war. Um, and also, people will see the side effects of this. Say, if a wokeism led to people being actually happier, it would get adopted and be mainstream, but it's not. Most people who adopt woke ideology tend to be clinically depressed, and their younger siblings or their nieces or nephews or the next generation will see like, hey, wait, this isn't working for my older peers. Why would I repeat that path? And that's how these things get fixed without violence. It's just seeing the end game of where this stuff plays out. Like I used to be a doomer when I was in my early 20s because the financial crisis happened when I was in college. Um, there were some personal things that happened when I was a kid that made me more cynical towards the world within my own family. And it caused me to have a more negative view of the world and distrusting of people. But as I've gotten older and I've seen a lot of these doomer predictions that were supposed to play out in the mid 2010s never happen, um, it made me realize that the world is not so bad. And that's the lesson I think for this election is like the election really, all it really does is that it gets the government out of the way from you pursuing your own goals in life. And the world, the world heals. Like things do not perpetually get bad unless like you just have a structurally broken civilization. And I don't really think that Western civilization, I'm not informed enough about other cultures to really say it about them. So this is not like an indictment on non-Western cultures. But I think that Western culture is not inherently broken enough that it can't self-correct. And yeah, these problems tend to self-correct. So that's why I'm not worried about it. And you're already starting to see it. Gen Z voted more right wing than any other generation. Um, even Gen Z women voted less for Kamala than they did for Biden. And Gen Z men voted net for Trump. So there's your answer. Um, like wokeism is old news. And a lot of these, and also when the companies have to prioritize profitability over good feelings, a lot of these DEI people lost their jobs when they had the mini recession in 2022. and you'll see probably more of them. They'll be the first to be laid off because they don't produce any actual value. Um, yeah. So did you promise make a video on population going down? I did do a debunking the video about population. Check my debunking the Doomer playlist. I'll probably make a follow up about it, but I've just had so many. It's in the queue. I've just had so many other videos to make. Like I already have all the videos for the rest of the year either recorded or scheduled. So like, and then I have another 50 ideas after that. So give me some time. Um, let's see. How many hours do you put into this channel? I don't really count, so I don't know. I don't put full-time hours into this channel. I probably dedicate one weekend day a month on average to recording, and then I edit and do other things and throughout the rest of the month for the channel. I have also been teaching myself a lot of things like how to make better content, how to write better titles and thumbnails, and I've used AI to help speed up a lot of things to help me get out more content quicker and make it more interesting, and use AI editors to cut out a lot of the pauses and ums and things like that. So that's why I've been able to speed up my production without putting the same amount of work into it. But yeah, I put a lot of time into it, but I can't tell you how much because I don't even keep track. Do you support the fact that the current system allows for more leisure time in college compared to time post-graduation? It depends what you're studying and where you go to school. Like I know people who go to Ivy League schools and very competitive universities, and they have no free time because they're spending all their time studying. Or people who study something hard like engineering. So I don't think that's entirely true. Like a lot of people have more free time post-graduation. It really depends on what path in life that you're doing. So I think that's a flawed question. Do you think the Fed will cut big in its next cuts? No. They will not cut big until it's clear that there's recession. So like let's say the economic data is just disastrous and you see lots of job losses and contracting GDP and a lot of other negative shocks, then yeah, that'll happen. But short of that, I think that you're not going to see a big rate cuts. In fact, the rate cut path might reverse. What are your thoughts on housing market in California, especially along the coast? I think that it's at risk of rolling over once the demographic turnover happens, mainly, especially because Prop 13 step-up basis was removed with Prop 19. It's just a matter. The problem is that one, the wealthier boomers tend to have longer lifespans, and two, there is a limited supply on the coast. But the combination of NIMBY policies becoming less popular with generational turnover opening things up, I think coastal real estate will go down, especially in real terms. However, coastal real estate will always be more expensive than interior real estate. However, it will line up with the income of the community. Say, for example, I live in a coastal community where the median income is $250,000 a household. Yet the average property price where I live is $4 million, or some say it's $5 million. If you had a historical ratio, say of 6x, which is a little high actually compared to historical housing to income multiple, 6x income, then the median property in my neighborhood should be worth $1.5 million, which is still way out of reach for most Americans, but it would be in reach for the type of demographic that lives here. And so that's where it's gonna fall in line with incomes. But high income people will want to live on the coast, so it'll still always be more expensive than other places. But the relative spread is kind of condensed. Like we've already seen this. Like Miami is caught up to San Diego and Orange County in terms of real estate prices. Any city that's big enough to have a Major League Baseball team is going to converge because you have that size city has the same cultural amenities as most places. And if it's way cheaper to live someplace else, there will be an arb. And there'll be some premium for weather, but there's also negative premium for high taxes in the same weather. So a lot of it's a wash. So yeah, that's what's it called? What I'm doing. Yeah, Andrew, you asked about reaction videos. I have a whole playlist of reaction videos that you can watch. I've done like 10 or 12 of them. A lot of them are from default hist because they owned, but all of the FMOC is appointed by the government, and they have to have central bank private because if it's directly politicized and tied to the government, they're going to have the negative incentives to have overly easy monetary policy, and you get Argentina. So that's not a conspiracy. That's part of the design. You need an independent private central bank. Like the conspiracy that they're just doing it to enrich their friends. When you're short the stock market, you definitely want to think that way because you get pissed off. But it yeah, but I'm not necessarily saying that's entirely true. I mean, there's some moments that I'm like, wait a second, maybe they are doing this to protect the government or to protect their friends. Like, I think other central banks that are less independent around the world, that's clear. Like the Bank of Japan, the ECB, they're more captive, they're more political, they're not as private, and that's their problem. Part of the reason why the Fed is a better central bank relative to the other ones is because it is more disconnected. Yeah. What is my educational background? I answered this last time. I went to UC Santa Barbara for my undergrad, and I did the CFA exams, and yeah, and I've worked in finance for 15 years or more. So I've a lot of self-education over the years too. Yeah. Let's see. Thoughts on the U.S. ability to keep global reserve currency in the long term? They will keep it until somebody creates a hard money alternative. Any tips on Gen Zs entering the workforce? Yeah, you should use work as like extended education if you're an entrepreneurial minded person, and take the jobs that will give you the most useful skills and connections for your next step. If you're more corporate path, just pick where you want to live and base your job on that and something you like to do. Let's see. I'm a doctor based out of India trying to grapple integration options. Any suggestions in the US, Australia, or Canada? I'm not really an expert on how hard it is for immigrants to get into specific countries. But I would go to wherever place that you can transfer your credentials the easiest, that's still in the OECD band of countries. Because like I always hear these horror stories about people from other countries. They have like medical degrees or law degrees, but they can't use them because they're not valid because the new country doesn't recognize the degree, and that's not a good situation to be in. So, yeah. Let's see. What about that secret meeting at the duck hunting club on creating the Fed? Oh, the creature from Jekyll Island. Yeah, that whole thing is real. It's a good book. It is kind of like these people wanted the central bank because the central bank, what it does is it smooths out cycles, and that smoothing out of cycles comes at the expense of inflation. So that's why it's not politically popular. Like pre-Fed, when you had no central bank, you had deflation and purchasing power going up for the first 120 years of history, but you had more volatile economy. You had crazy highs for growth, but you also had panics where most rich people lost their fortunes and people were foreclosed out of their homes, and it was just like a complete disaster. But then once all the market cleared, it kind of went back, and a lot of people just couldn't take this volatility anymore. And so that's why they wanted to put it on the Fed. Is UCSB a good school? Yeah, it's in the top 30 to 35 schools in the U.S. News and World Report. It's a top 50 university. And it was a lower rank when I went there than it is now. So I got some ROI on my degree in that way. It's much harder to get into too. Thoughts on arts degrees? What do you mean, like studying an art major specifically, or just like a bachelor's in arts generally? Is do you think the great replacement is real? Um, I think that what's it called when it comes to the great replacement idea? Um, I think there are some people who want it to be real, and they and I think that there are political and economic incentives. There's a lot of these countries and elites in the world like oh no, I have too many. We have too many old people and not enough young people to replace them. So they just blindly think, oh, we just need any young people, no matter where they're from, to work to pay for the social security and the pensions for the old people. When they don't really factor in cultural fit or education quality or skills or anything like that. And they just think that the people are just replaceable cogs, and any person is a valid replacement when that's not true. And so, yeah, that's what they're trying to do. It's not necessarily like some evil conspiracy theory to like permanently change the demographics and the culture in a negative way. It's just a side effect of short-sighted policy goals. Um, yeah, and immigration is a problem. It doesn't even if you and my views on immigration are maybe more economically driven. I think the problems of immigration they are true no matter what country you bring in the people from. Like I'm not going to talk about my cultural views on immigration on this channel because it's not particularly relevant. But are you doing YouTube full time? No, I'm not. I don't think I'll ever do YouTube full time, to be quite honest. I run a business and that's I run it, which is my main source of income. And the fact that I am self-employed is why I'm allowed to talk about this kind of stuff. I don't have some boss who will fire me for saying these kind of things. But no, the ad revenue is too volatile. And I never thought I did this channel as a hobby originally. And the fact I have this audience is what I'm very appreciative of. But I don't really want to do YouTube full time. And plus the nicheness of my content, I'm never going to get Mr. Beast sized numbers, to be quite honest with you guys. Um, and if you want to make generational wealth, like you're going to need to I don't think it's going to be solely on the back of YouTube. However, I mean, YouTube, I think could be helpful with my ambitions in the real world. And I can use it as a platform to help me with other goals in my life, but I will never use it as my primary and exclusive source of income. So the Fed is there to protect the wealthy. Well, that's what the conspiracies are, and that's what the wealthy who endorse the Fed feel like purpose is. If you were forced to do another major out of high school, which one would it be? It depends. Like if my career path would have been altered or if my family would have pushed back, because yeah, like my family paid for my college, but there were conditions, and one of them was I had to study something that I could have an applicable use for. So yeah, maybe I would have, if I didn't have to worry about that, maybe I would have become a history major because I think history is really interesting personally. But I was really worried about the employment prospects for history, so that's why I never studied it. If I went to a school that had entrepreneurship as a primary major, I would have done that instead of minoring in it. Like that could be would be something I would do. Maybe I would have let's see. I don't think I would have done any of the hard sciences because I just didn't have the aptitude or the interest. But I wouldn't have done any of the soft majors because I would have been worried about hireability. I probably would have done something else within business or history, or maybe even a creative or some sort of, or maybe like creative writing. Even maybe if I was going to go in the more liberal arts direction, because that is a skill that I could have used for other things, and that's something I had an interest in my younger years, but that's something I had to give up just with all my other time. The things I just don't have time to write novels or books anymore. Personal business solution. How did you raise capital for your firm? Well, I'm a service-based business. So I mean, I self-financed it. I saved enough money working corporate that I can leave my old job and like have a few years of savings and put in the initial capital contributions that I needed to. And thankfully, the amounts weren't overwhelmingly big. Um, but if I had a more capital intensive business, I would have tried to get venture funding, or I would have had to get an SBA loan or something. But if you're a more service based business, the capital costs are manageable that you can do it for your own savings. Um, yeah, let's see. Um, where would you place stuff on the economic scale? Keynesian, neoliberal, classical, Austrian, etc. I'm somewhere between the Austrian and the Chicago school. I am sympathetic to a lot of Austrian ideas, but I really don't like praxeology. I really, I don't, I think you need to have metrics and you need to have ways to quantify your thesis. You can't just base things off of like purely argument alone. That was the problem with ancient Greek culture and philosophy. I learned that actually from Rudyard of all things and dive deeper into it. But you need to have what's it some you need to have some actual like data or ways to falsify your ideas, which is why I don't fully buy into Austrian economics. But yeah, my view somewhere is I have like a mix between the Austrian and Chicago style economics if I had to choose a school. But I have some of my own ideas that are completely out there. Like check part 9 on Iceberg of Economics series, where I go into my own ideas that don't fit into any of the mainstream schools of economics. Um, what type of business do I run? I already mentioned that. I run a wealth management firm. And I've used to do, and I still do sometimes on a one-off basis, macroeconomic research for businesses and institutional investors. Um, let's see. Do you think the House of Saud is the richest family? I don't know. I think there's a good chance that Putin is wealthier, but again, these numbers aren't published, so it's just really speculation. Um, how do you think Trump likely think? Oh, I think he'll definitely nominate RFK. Most likely, Department of Health and Human Services. What's your opinion of dollar milkshake theory? I think it's interesting, um, and I'll leave it at that. Um, like, I think there are some points where there are real dollar squeezes, but again, I think that it's not always. That may not always be the case, but yeah, it's an interesting thesis. I don't really know enough about it to go into super deep dive. Let's see. Do I have any other questions? Or is it time to end the chat and make dinner? I'm just checking through this right now. Have you dealt with burnout in your career? How did you recover? How many hours do you? All right. Yeah, I have dealt with burnout in my career. When I tried a business and it didn't work out, it I had to take several months off from doing anything because I was just so emotionally and physically drained. Um, yeah, and sometimes when you feel it, like there's a certain. That's why people have to take vacations. Like if I've had a stretch or I didn't go on a vacation effectively for that longer than a weekend for like 2 years, and I felt very burnt out. And when you're burned out, you can't really think, or you have a lot more brain fog. You tend to want to sleep a lot more. And like, yeah, you just get less motivated to do things and you don't understand why. Because you still have like on the front brain level, like I want to do stuff, but like deep down, you're just kind of like exhausted, mentally fatigued. And so the way you got to recover is depending on how severe the burnout is. If it's mild, A week vacation will do it. If it's severe, you might need to just have a major lifestyle change that reduces stress, whether that's moving to a different city, whether it's changing up who you socialize with, whether it's getting a new job or new relationships or whatever. It takes usually some drastic kind of changes to get out of it if it's something more severe. Or you realize what you're doing is not suiting you and you need to just move on to the next thing. Um, but yeah, are bureaucrat like hierarchies inherently less efficient than capitalist hierarchies? What's the incentive to stay efficient? Yeah, bureaucracies and government are less efficient because they have no threat of being replaced or disrupted. Um, like if you have no competition that will keep you on your toes and take you out, it's a lot easier to kick back and not optimize for productivity. There's no incentive to stay efficient without threat of competition. Um, let's see. Mhm. Given you spent over a decade working as an analyst, that has been easier or difficult building your own book of business, finding clients. Um, People don't question my competency. That's not something I've really had to worry about, thankfully. Um, so that's um, that's the plus of having my experience that I've had. The building the book of business, the part that's difficult is that I'm just not naturally a business development or salesperson. Um, yeah, and marketing is not something that doesn't come to me naturally either. I tend to try to lead by example more than by shoving down like what I need to do or hard sell people. Um, yeah, that's kind of the question that's kind of the answer to that question. It does help. The more experience you have, the easier it is to build a book of business because people don't trust you if you have no experience and you're young. I've tried to raise money for a business as a 23-year-old and that did not work very well. I wouldn't recommend doing that unless if you have like the most game breaking technology possible. Um, but short of that, yeah, the experience, you don't want people questioning your competency. So that's the main advantage. And also, when you have more experience and you have a bigger network, you could find people to partner with to help you. And you can find better people who will want to work with you because they know that you know what you're doing and you're qualified and not just some random young ambitious kid trying to prove himself. Um, all right, women are getting degrees more than men. This trend is worsening. Will make money through trade, but not academic achievement. How will this impact Social Security? Well, if you look at the political divide, it's essentially measured by I could tell your politics based on your income relative to your education. If you're somebody who's making more money than what your degrees or the prestige of your resume people would assume, you're a right wing. If you make less money than your degree and your prestige would imply, you are left. And that's how this expresses it. Like the 2024 election essentially was a referendum on this inherent conflict that you mentioned. So, yeah. Um, what's my handicap? It's not very good. It's over 20. Um, I getting a lot of golf questions this time. Is doing a case study better for cover letters or job applications? Yeah, and not just for STEM majors. I did case when I switched from cover letters to case studies to get jobs in finance. When I was looking for one, it helped me a lot. So I'm definitely in the case study camp. Um, how do economies grow if a population is shrinking? Well, the people become more productive. That's how they grow. There's three variables that can grow an economy. There's inflation, which grows nominal GDP, there's productivity, and there's population growth. So if um, if you want real GDP, it's total factor productivity plus and population growth. So if your population is shrinking, you need to have productivity grow faster than population. And or if you want to just strip out that, maybe we should measure economic growth not in GDP but GDP per capita, because that's really what matters at the end of the day. Any tips on picking up women? Um, I'm not the guy to give advice on that. I mean, I've had my ups and downs with dating, but I recommend, when it comes to taking dating advice, take it from somebody who had options but also has a successful marriage. Like, the guy who married his high school sweetheart might not be the best guy for dating advice, but neither is the perpetual bachelor. And it also depends on your dating goals. But I'm not going to be comfortable giving dating advice until I'm married. Uh, let's see. And then also, um, I don't know. Did you ever grow up? Anybody who's asking about that, if you grew up with sisters, you should probably know this. Like, think about how you deal with, like, dealt with your sisters growing up. They love and care about them, and but at the same time, you don't need their approval. Maybe if you approach dating like treating them like a sister, that like you treat your sisters, that might be a little bit of a good example. Um, assuming you have a good relationship with your sisters. Um, let's see. Also, I take it you don't recommend purchasing multifamily apartment buildings. It depends where on multifamily and what cap rate you can get at them. There's at the right price, any investment is a good investment or a bad investment. So yeah, that's my view on apartments. It's all about where and what price you're getting them at. Um, let's see. Uh, what do you think of longer duration bond yields increasing lately? Yeah, it's kind of surprising given the Fed is cutting rates and yields are going up. That means that people are afraid the deficit's going to widen because of Trump. But even though since the election, the 10 years kind of not moved that much, or that inflation fears are still there. That's what that means to me. Is that the inflation concern hasn't really gone away. Um, The Old Money versus New Money series was published at the perfect election cycle. Maybe I got lucky. Thoughts on the social sciences and their relevance today? How applicable are these fields in addressing current issues in modern career paths? Um, it, I mean, it depends. I think a lot of those things can be self-taught, which is why I don't recommend studying them in school necessarily if you read the right books. And a lot of the professors are blinded by ideology. And a lot of people in general who study these things are blinded by ideology. They use history, political science, and sociological research to basically justify their existing political philosophies, whether on the right or the left. So I think having a good baseline of this knowledge is important, but I don't really think that it's worthwhile to build a career solely on that knowledge. Why was Kamala's campaign focused on abortion so much? Um, that's a cultural issue that I'm not going to really talk about on this channel. There are certain topics I want to avoid to keep this channel on course and not to alienate people that would otherwise would otherwise learn a lot from this content, and that is one of them. Um, so yeah, there are a lot of, if you want my answer on that one, come to one of my meetups. I will, in private, I will gladly give you all of those kind of the politically incorrect questions. But so come to one of the fan meetups when I'm in your city if you want the answer to that. Do you have a private pilot license or desire to learn how to fly? This is something I wanted to always do. I flew a plane once when I was in Civil Air Patrol at 14 years old, and I was like, "Oh wow, that's really cool. I'd like to get a private plane flying one day, have my own little Cessna and fly around one day." The time and the money and the effort to go into that is a lot, and I just frankly do not have the time. It's not a priority for me, but it's something I'd like to do one day. Um, yeah. What are your thoughts on percentage on Vietnamese Americans? There, where I live, there's a lot of Vietnamese Americans. There, especially a lot of them go to my Catholic parish that I'm a part of. So I went to school with a lot of them. They are a good example of a um, displaced refugee group that has been very successful in integrating to America and being a valuable part of my local community where I live. So they're an American success story overall. Um, let's see. Um, all right. In terms of your personal situation, living being, just send that in an email. When are you coming to Toronto? When I have enough of votes to come to Toronto. You guys are under a lot of other cities that I've mentioned earlier. So, in fact, I even have more people requested Vancouver within Canada than Toronto. So, yeah, if you get 25 plus people to vote to come to Toronto and commit to showing up, then yeah. And I'm not saying 25 is the magic number. I'm not going to tell you what the magic number is, but I'm just throwing stuff out in the air. But yeah, I'll come by to Toronto. Um, yeah, or if there's a conference that somebody invites me to speak publicly at in Toronto, I'll come. Um, yeah. Let's see. Would you consider Piedmont, California, old money? Are you talking about Piedmont in the East Bay by Oakland? I'm not really familiar enough with it. I know it's one of the nicer areas in that area over there, but don't know enough to comment. Pharmaceutical monopoly. Well, they have to have some sort of monopoly. Otherwise, you'll have no incentive to innovate new drugs. It's very expensive to develop new cures for diseases. And if you don't really, if you don't have some sort of patent durability that people can have a monopolized profit off of it, nobody will have incentivized research for drugs. That's why the U.S. tends to develop a lot better and more innovations in the biotechnology space than Europe does, because they have a socialized medicine system that doesn't reward that kind of behavior, entrepreneurial um, research and development. What should be done with older workers who get displaced by automation outsourcing? Do we put them on welfare or have to relocate them in other cities with more job opportunities? Depends how much older you're talking about with older. Like if they're retirement age and they didn't save for retirement, then their families should be taking care of them, to be quite honest. And if they decide not to have a good relationship with their family, um, then that's a problem. But in terms of if they're younger, say like 40s and 50s, then they're going to have to retrain and learn another job. And if that requires moving to another city, uh, it requires moving to another city. I think this is a real risk. And that's why people who are employed now in disruptible industries need to be continuing to retool and learn new skills or figure out how they can survive in their niche, even as AI evolves. Um, yeah. I mean, when do you come to San Francisco? I will be coming to San Francisco probably sometime in the first quarter of next year. I have a lot of friends in San Francisco. I have business opportunities up there. I already have enough votes to come to San Francisco, so I will definitely be there. That's on the tour, and I'll probably be going to the Bay Area a second time in Santa Cruz in the summer of 2025 for sure. So if you missed the San Francisco meetup, there will be another Bay Area meetup, but it'll be down in Santa Cruz, California. What are your thoughts on pursuing a law degree today? If you want to be a lawyer and have a passion for the law, and you can do it at a cost that doesn't require you to take on too much debt, go for it. Um, but otherwise, I personally don't like law. That's why I didn't pursue it. If you want to do it just for the money, I don't recommend it. And every lawyer that I've met has said the same thing. it's not worth doing if you're just trying to have a stable job and make a good buck. So if that's your motivation, don't go to law school. Is San Diego on the tour? Yes, it is. That's another one that's going to be earlier in probably sometime Q1 2025. And if people want me to come to your city again, fill out the form and vote. Um, do you play League of Legends? No, I've never played League of Legends. I'm not into MMOs. I mean, the only ones I kind of play, um, I played the only online gaming really I did play was a few PC real time strategy games back in the day, like StarCraft and Age of Empires, and I played Unreal Tournament, um, but I never got into online console gaming or WoW, and I'm glad I didn't because I've heard those are like major major time sucks. And with console game, I always liked more single player Nintendo type games. Um, let's see. Do you think that there is a technology like blockchain that would allow us to see transactions from government accounts? Would it reduce the amount of corruption? Yeah, I'm always in favor of more visibility. Transparency reduces corruption. Um, do you expect blue collar workers to gain a bigger prestige in the future as automation eliminates a lot of white collar work, just like how entrepreneurship wasn't valued by the bourgeoisie a long time ago? Uh, Possibly. Watch my video about the blue and white collar convergence that I did back in like January. I go into more of that there. But the answer is possibly. Um, let's see. Did I miss anything? Man, how long? We've almost 4 hours now, guys, and we still have a strong audience. I love having such a great audience. Thank you guys all for being great support, and hopefully, you guys continue to watch the channel. Um, I appreciate all of what you guys have done, and your comments and questions have helped inspire me to keep going over the years. When I was a small channel, and I didn't think really anybody was watching, but yeah, I just I'm glad people find my ideas interesting. Um, yeah, what kind of and people ask me about my business I run. Yeah, I run a wealth management firm, and I also do some macroeconomic research and consulting. Um, let's see. Uh, do you bench? Like bench pressing? Um, I used to bench a lot more in my 20s. I do dumbbell bench still, but I don't really bench with like a full size bar anymore. And due to some physical limitations, it's not really the best workout for me if I really wanted to maximize strength. There's other better things for me to do. What's the workout routine? Well, I try to target lifting 3 days a week. When things get busy, I sometimes goes to the side. I play tennis at least once a week, or once, usually with my friends or my father. Um, and I go on long walks. And when it's warm enough, I like to go swimming. Uh, I'm not really into treadmills or exercise bikes or ellipticals or anything like that. It just bores me. I lift weights mainly because I know it scientifically boosts my longevity and I want to live as long as I possibly can on this earth. I'm never just given like my bone and muscular structure. I'll never become super jacked, and that's not really a priority of mine. But I do have a priority though of like maintaining my health span as long as possible. That's my goal for lifting, and I don't want to get overweight or obese because I was overweight badly when I was in the ages of 9 to 15, and I never want that to be the case again. Let's see how. Do high housing costs and rent affect economies? 50% of income going to housing, investment going to housing. Is there a magic percentage that's healthy for an economy? Honestly, housing is a non-productive expense. Lower the better, ideally. Like, yeah, it's good to build new construction and housing. That's grow. People need places to live, but like if housing's a lower percentage of income, that allows more money to be spent elsewhere or invested in other productive assets. So I think that anything above 30% is bad for a community and bad for society. But I don't really see why there should be a floor on how affordable housing should be. Affordable housing is unequivocally a good thing, except for those who own real estate, and that affordability comes from prices falling versus incomes rising faster than real estate prices. Yeah. And yeah, it's all right. Lower housing price equals higher discretionary income. Have you thought about doing a Discord server or a forum? No, because I never thought I'd have enough people want to go on one. So yeah, I have my Substack. People could comment on those. If you guys haven't joined, if you join the free version of the Substack, you get my book, old money book list of all the books that I used as my sources for the content. And then I have a paid version, which gets access to my bonus videos and other things like that. Yeah, if somebody wants to start one, go ahead and do it and just make me like an admin or something. And yeah, I would appreciate that. And you can do it and I could post a link to it in some of the descriptions. Um, I don't, yeah, if you want to do that. And yeah, would you say Christianity and the Crusades revived the sciences and mathematics, or has it always been continuous? I think it has always been continuous, really, since the um, the Middle Ages. But like the, I think it's the Catholic Church was people like to judge it as being anti-science, where it really was the institution that preserved science and scientific inquiry and knowledge in the Dark Ages. Um, and Greg, like genetics, for example, like the study of genetics was invented by a monk, Gregor Mendel, and a lot of other modern science, like the foundations of it, was from religious people, like and people who were in the clergy. So, like, I don't really think, yeah, it's I don't really think that science inherently was um, just revived by the Crusades. The Crusades helped exchange some of the information and discoveries in the Muslim world and bring them to European proto scientists and academics and researchers. And like example, the Arabic numerous system comes from the Muslim world. Like imagine if we still had to do math with Roman numerals. I probably wouldn't be working in finance. So yeah, the exchanges from the Middle Ages between the Muslim world and Christendom is what kind of helped accelerate modern mathematics and science. Um, yeah. What do you think about 200 trillion of unfunded liabilities in the US? How long can the US rack up debt before all the growth stops? Well, they could, I mean, the thing is that the debt will be solved with inflation. That's exactly what's going on here. Um, yeah, the thing that's not going to disrupt the economy is not um, debt, like the debt and unfunded liabilities. Those will be paid for by printed money. What will happen is, will inflation get so high that we have a revolution and society gets destabilized? Like this election is an example. In the West, every election, every major Western country, there's been a party turnover because we've had mildly high inflation. Like it was half the level it was in the 70s. And it was enough to cause all the political turmoil we've had. So if you had real high inflation caused by more money needed to be printed to cover this stuff, I can't imagine how bad the reaction will be. Um, yeah, let's see. So that's the answer to that question. And yeah, I think Christianity has been helpful for developing the sciences because the theology of Christianity is the idea that God has certain rules on how things work, and science is the quest to find out how God structured the world. So that's yeah. As often as for personal situations, I don't answer those directly on live streams. So you gotta contact me. Um, actually, I have another question for you guys too. Is like, why would you want to be on a Discord versus a subreddit, um, or like one of those old school message boards? Like, I don't know. That that's that's something I've always been curious really about, or a well, yeah, I mean, I can understand why you wouldn't want to be on a Telegram, but um what is the appeal of Discord versus having like a subreddit or like or like a Facebook group or something like that? Um yeah, let's see. Yeah, I guess I didn't grow up in the age of Discord. Like I grew up like my age is basically people younger than me are the ones who embrace Snapchat, and people older than me are the ones who didn't. Like, and that's kind of where my line was in terms of social media. Um, I don't know. The only one I really embrace is YouTube. I mean, I have a LinkedIn, I have an X, I have an Instagram, but it's not really my priority. I did read a lot of the forums in high school. Yeah, I'm in my mid 30s. So, yeah, in terms of my age. So, like that's how old I am. And the bodybuilding forums. I mean, it's funny because like when you're Google searching for random things, like that used to pop up as like a lot of the top entries, even if I wasn't looking for things related to bodybuilding. And I've never really been into bodybuilding personally. Um, but yeah, I've noticed my audience here is like based on the demographics, is say like on average like 23 to 30. Like, there are people who are I have a lot of older people and also a lot of and a few younger, but that tends to be the demographic who mostly watches this channel. Do you think families lose their wealth in 3 generations? Um, if they're mismanaged, yeah. That's like, there's a real reason why they have that phrase, like, um, wooden shoes to slippers to wooden shoes in 3 generations. If you can make it past 3, you're gonna be an old money dynasty. But it's very hard because, first of all, if you're wealthy, you tend to have higher birth rates and have a lot of kids to split it up. The genetic lottery may not work in your favor. Maybe some of the patriarchs or matriarchs don't their kids do not marry people who are as intelligent or of high aptitude or drive as they do, and so the family falls apart, or just inheritance disputes take it down. There's a lot of things that can, or your core business gets disrupted and they don't successfully diversify their wealth in time. So there's a lot of things that can happen. But if you're a family that makes it past 3, then you're usually in pretty good shape, especially like if you have protections to prevent spendthrifts from ruining it. That's my view. Do you think modern technology has made people more attracted to the service sector rather than the industrial sector? Well, I think that the industrial sector being shipped offshore has made it less appealing, and also the industrial sector being a lot more physically taxing made it less appealing. Now I think the industrial sector might become more appealing because a lot of the jobs are going to be more like behind a screen and either like engineering or coding or stuff like that to manage the robots making the stuff. And the economies of scale of working in manufacturing are a lot better. Like there's only so many widgets somebody could screw in a day when they were working like on an old school human assembly line. But the economies of scale, I think, will make the compensation higher in industrial, which will make it more popular. Yeah, the reason service is more popular is because it's less taxing on the body, and you can do it for longer, and and that's why it's more prestigious too. Generally, a lot of society, the things that are considered prestigious is the stuff that's farthest away from brutish manual labor. Like a lot of cultural things that, like example, why people prefer pale skin over being dark in certain cultures is because that means you're not out in the sun um, doing manual labor. And a lot of social hierarchies from the dawn of time are based on who has to do the manual labor and who doesn't. So that kind of explains it. Aren't the Vanderbilts a 3+3 generations? The Vanderbilts have kind of lost all of their wealth. They're not really around anymore. Um, but yeah, I don't know how many generations they've lasted exactly. I don't think I'm going to do dives into specific families because there's another YouTube channel who does it better than me. It's called Old Money Luxury. They kind of go into the history of the specific families. And that's why I took a 2-year hiatus from the Old Money channel, because I thought they basically captured that niche away from me until I realized there's more bigger picture esoteric things that they weren't talking about. And I started it back up again. All right. All right. We're hitting the 4-hour mark. Is there any more questions, or um, is it time to call it a wrap? Okay. I think I'm going to call it end it here and make myself some dinner. I'm starting to lose my voice. But thank you guys all for being on again. Um, Before I leave, just to remind you guys, vote for the locations for the Analyzing Finance with Nick tour. That's starting in 2025. If you have any direct questions for me in terms of like helping you with like anything in terms of financial or money managers, anything, you feel free to reach out to me through my website. And if you want the premium content, check out being a member and check out the Substack. Um, yeah. And also, if you have suggestions on people who I should bring on as guests for future videos, let me know. I would appreciate that. Have a good evening, all. And hopefully, this earlier time was better for you guys. Uh, Thanks for watching.